Hey guys, tonight we step back nearly 300 years to a world where the flip of a switch means nothing, where darkness is absolute, and where your survival depends on skills most of us have completely forgotten. You're about to experience a single day, a night, in the life of a colonial American family, somewhere in the 1700s, and let me tell you right now, you probably wouldn't last a week. Not because you're weak, but because everything you take for granted simply doesn't exist yet. No refrigerator humming in the corner, no thermostat keeping things cozy, no bathroom down the hall, just you, your family, a wooden structure that barely keeps out the wind, and a whole lot of hard work stretching from before sunrise to well after sunset. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see this community scattered across time zones, all of us drifting off together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, and for a moment you're not entirely sure they're open at all. The darkness is that complete. There's no glow from a streetlight filtering through curtains, no little LED dot from a smoke detector, no neighbour's porch light casting shadows on your ceiling. This is darkness as your ancestors knew it. Thick, velvet, almost tangible. You could wave your hand in front of your face and see absolutely nothing. And yet somehow your body knows it's time to rise. The rooster hasn't crowed yet. He will in perhaps 20 minutes, but something deeper has stirred you. Maybe it's the cold. The temperature inside your home has dropped significantly overnight because the fire in the hearth, the only source of heat in this entire structure, has burned down to embers. You can feel the chill pressing against your nose and cheeks, the only parts of you exposed above the heavy wool blankets and the linen sheets beneath them. Your breath, if there were light to see it, would be visible in little clouds. You're not alone in this bed. Depending on your circumstances, you might be sharing it with a spouse, with siblings, with children, or even with a traveller who needed lodging for the night. Historians still argue whether bed sharing in colonial America was purely practical or carried social significance beyond simple warmth and space conservation. What we know for certain is that the notion of everyone having their own bed, their own room, their own private sleeping space. That's a fantasy your great-great-great-grandchildren might enjoy, but not you. Not here, not now. You shift carefully, trying not to wake whoever lies beside you, and your feet search for the edge of the bed. The bed itself is likely a simple wooden frame with ropes strung across it to support a mattress stuffed with straw, corn husks, or if you're fortunate, feathers. The phrase, sleep tight, that people still use today, it comes from these rope beds. You had to tighten the ropes periodically, or the whole thing would sag and you'd wake up with your backside touching the floor. The mattress covering is rough against your skin, nothing like the smooth cotton or synthetic fabrics of the future. Everything here has texture, has presence, demands to be noticed. Your feet find the wooden floorboards, and the cold shoots up through your soles immediately. If you're lucky, there's a small rag rug beside the bed, something hand-woven to provide a moment's barrier between flesh and frigid wood. If you're not lucky, you simply grit your teeth and stand anyway. There's no time to complain. There's never time to complain. In the darkness, you navigate by memory. You've lived in this house, if you can call it a house. It might be a single-room structure, or perhaps 2 rooms if your family has done well, for years. You know where the chair is, where the chest sits, where the doorframe meets your shoulder if you drift too far left. Your hands find the rough wool of your outer garments, hung on a peg near the bed. You begin to dress, still unable to see, your fingers doing the work your eyes cannot. Dressing in the 1700s is not a quick affair, even when you're practiced at it. There are layers to consider. First, the shift or shirt you slept in, a long linen garment that serves as underwear, nightwear, and the base layer all at once. Over this, you'll add stays if you're a woman, which are essentially a precursor to the corset, though not quite as dramatically cinched as the Victorian versions to come. For men, there are breeches to pull on, securing them at the knee. Stockings come next, pulled up and tied or buckled in place. Then the outer garments, petticoats and gowns for women, waistcoats and coats for men. Everything is natural fibre, linen, wool, perhaps a little cotton if you have connections to trade networks that reach the warmer colonies or beyond. Here's a quirky detail that might make you smile in this darkness. The average Colonial American owned remarkably few garments. We're talking perhaps 2 or 3 outfits total. Laundry was such an exhausting, time-consuming process that people simply didn't dirty clothes the way we do now. You wore the same thing day after day, airing it out between wearings, spot cleaning when necessary. The idea of changing clothes daily, of having a closet full of options, would seem almost obscenely wasteful to the version of you now fumbling with buttons and ties in the pre-dawn blackness. And speaking of that blackness, let's talk about why you're awake at this ungodly hour. The simple answer is, because you have to be. Daylight is your most precious resource. You cannot manufacture it, you cannot extend it, and you cannot afford to waste a single minute of it. Everything that requires seeing, which is almost everything, must be accomplished between sunrise and sunset. Yes, you have candles. Yes, you have the fire, but candles are expensive, either in money or in time, and firelight only reaches so far. The work of the day must happen during the day, which means you rise before the sun does to prepare. Somewhere across the room, or across the house if you're fortunate enough to have more than one room, you hear stirring. Someone else is awake. Perhaps it's your mother, already moving toward the hearth. Perhaps it's an older sibling. In a colonial household, there's a hierarchy of waking, a choreography that unfolds the same way every morning. Someone must tend the fire first. Everything else depends on it. You move toward the main room now, toward where the hearth waits. The embers still glow faintly, and this is both a relief and a responsibility. If those embers had died completely overnight, you'd be facing a much harder morning. Starting a fire from scratch is not impossible. You have flint and steel, you have tinder carefully saved for this purpose, but it's time-consuming and frustrating, especially when your fingers are numb and your breath clouds the air. Much better to coax those embers back to life. You kneel on the stone or packed earth floor in front of the hearth. The residual warmth feels almost luxurious against your face and hands. Carefully, you add small pieces of kindling, thin sticks, dried leaves, perhaps some wood shavings saved specifically for this moment. You lean in close and blow, gently, steadily, feeding oxygen to the struggling embers. There's an art to this, a patience. Blow too hard and you scatter the embers uselessly, too soft and nothing catches. But you've been doing this your entire life. Your lungs know the rhythm. A tiny flame licks up, then another. You add slightly larger pieces of wood, building a structure that allows air to circulate while giving the fire fuel to consume. Within a few minutes, the flames are strong enough to illuminate the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And now, finally, you can see. The room reveals itself in orange and gold. The rough-hewn beams of the ceiling, the simple furniture, the tools and implements hanging from pegs, the table where meals are eaten and work is done. The walls might be whitewashed plaster over wooden laths, or they might simply be exposed timber chinked with mud and straw to keep out the wind. The windows, if there are windows, are small, perhaps covered with oiled paper rather than glass, which is expensive and fragile. In this moment, as the fire grows, the room transforms from a cold, dark void into something that almost resembles comfort. Almost. Because now the real work begins. The fire needs constant attention. It must be fed, tended, adjusted depending on what you're doing with it. Cooking requires different arrangements than heating. Boiling water needs the pot in one position. Baking demands another. The fire is not merely a convenience. It is the engine of your household, the heart that pumps life into every aspect of your day. And if you let it die, through neglect, through distraction, through simple bad luck, everything suffers. Outside, the first grey hints of dawn begin to touch the sky. The rooster, right on cue, announces himself to the world. His crowing echoes across the farmyard, a sound that carries on the cold morning air, reminding every creature within earshot that another day has begun. Whether you're ready for it or not, whether you slept well or poorly, whether your bones ache or your spirit sags, the rooster doesn't care, the sun doesn't care, the day is coming and you will meet it. You take one more look at the growing fire, satisfying yourself that it's stable enough to leave for a moment. Then you turn toward the door, toward the outside world where chores await, where animals need tending, where the endless cycle of colonial existence asks everything of you once again. But that's the next part of your morning. For now you've conquered the first challenge. You've risen in the darkness, you've dressed without sight, and you've brought fire back to life. In a world without electricity, these small victories are everything. The fire crackles behind you as you pause for just a moment, letting its warmth seep into your back before you face the cold that waits beyond the door. But before you step outside, before you tend to animals or fetch water or begin any of the 1,000 tasks that define your day, you need to understand something essential about this hearth you've just revived. This isn't merely a source of heat. This is the absolute centre of your existence, the single most important feature of your home, and your relationship with it will shape every hour of every day you spend in the 1700s. The fireplace in a colonial American home is massive by modern standards. You're not looking at some decorative insert with ceramic logs and a gas line. You're looking at a gaping moor of stone or brick, often large enough to stand inside, equipped with iron hooks and cranes and trivets, and all manner of implements designed to hold pots at various heights and angles above the flames. The mantel above it serves as a shelf for essential items, candles, tinderbox, perhaps a clock if your family is prosperous. And the hearth extends outward into the room, a raised stone platform that catches sparks and provides a workspace for cooking. Everything in your daily life connects to this fire. Your morning porridge bubbles in a cast iron pot suspended over the flames. Your evening stew simmers in another. The water you'll use to wash your face, if you wash your face at all today, which is not guaranteed, must be heated here first. The bread you'll eat later requires this fire's heat, channeled into a brick oven built into the side of the chimney, or achieved through the clever use of a Dutch oven buried in coals. Your laundry, when you do it, demands enormous quantities of hot water. Soap making requires rendered fat and lye and sustained heat. Candle making, if you produce your own, happens here. Dyeing fabric, brewing beer, rendering tallow, smoking meat. The list stretches on, and let's talk about the sheer labour of keeping this fire fed. The average colonial household burns somewhere between 15 and 40 cords of wood per year, depending on climate, family size, and the efficiency of the fireplace itself. A cord of wood, if you're not familiar, is a stack measuring 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet. That's a lot of wood. Someone, usually the men and older boys of the household, though everyone pitches in when necessary, must fell trees, cut them into manageable lengths, split them into pieces sized for the fireplace, and stack them to dry. Green wood, freshly cut, burns poorly and produces excessive smoke. Properly seasoned wood, dried for 6 months to a year, burns hotter and cleaner. This means you're always working a year ahead, always planning, always thinking about next winter while enduring this one. The fire also dictates the architecture of your home. The chimney is the largest and most expensive feature of the structure, often built first so that the rest of the house can be constructed around it. In colder regions like New England, fireplaces tend to be positioned centrally, their massive chimneys radiating heat into multiple rooms. In warmer southern colonies, kitchens are sometimes built as separate structures to keep cooking heat away from living spaces during sweltering summers. The size of your chimney affects the draft, which affects how well smoke exits the room, which affects whether you spend your days in relatively clear air or constantly wiping tears from stinging eyes. Here's something that might surprise you. Even with the fire burning strongly, your home is not warm, not by modern standards. The heat radiates outward from the hearth, creating a zone of relative comfort extending perhaps 10 or 15 feet at most. Beyond that, the house remains cold. The far corners never really warm up. Your bedroom, if it's separate from the main room, might as well be outdoors for all the heat that reaches it. You learn to live with this. You cluster near the fire for tasks that don't require movement. You dress warmly indoors. You accept that parts of your home are simply cold, just as parts of the outdoors are cold, and you adapt your behaviour accordingly. The fire also serves as your primary source of light during dark hours, though calling it adequate illumination would be generous. Firelight is warm and flickering and remarkably limited in reach. You can read by it if you sit close enough, and the flames are strong enough, and your eyes are good enough. But many people's eyes are not good enough, damaged by smallpox or strain or simple genetic misfortune, with no eyeglasses available outside of wealthy urban circles. Historians still argue whether literacy rates in colonial America were helped or hindered by the difficulty of reading by firelight. Some suggest that the practice of reading aloud in groups emerged partly because one person with good vision near the fire could share text with others who couldn't see the page themselves. Now let's add another layer to your understanding of this hearth: the dangers. Fire in the 1700s is not the controlled, contained thing you might imagine. Sparks escape, embers pop, children tumble into flames, skirts catch and blaze up in seconds. Every colonial woman lived with the very real possibility of burning to death while cooking, her long garments igniting from a stray spark before she could react. The floors near fireplaces are often damaged, pocked with burn marks from escaped coals. Roofs catch fire. Whole houses burn, sometimes whole towns. The great urban fires that sweep through colonial cities, you might have heard of the Boston fires or the Charleston fires, often start from a single carelessly tended hearth. And yet you have no choice but to maintain this dangerous companion. Without the fire, you cannot cook. Without cooked food, you cannot eat. Or at least you cannot eat most of what sustains you. Raw grain is indigestible. Raw meat is possible but unpleasant and potentially dangerous. Many vegetables store better after cooking. The fire transforms raw materials into nourishment, and so you accept its risks as the price of survival. There's also a social dimension to the hearth that deserves attention. This is where the family gathers. In the evenings, after the day's work is done and darkness has fallen, everyone draws close to the fire. Stories are told here. Prayers are said. Children are scolded and praised and instructed in the ways of the world. Courtships happen here. Young couples sitting side by side under the watchful eyes of parents. Decisions are made about planting, about travel, about marriages and apprenticeships and land purchases. The fire witnesses all of it, crackling softly in the background, a constant presence around which human life organises itself. In wealthier homes you might find multiple fireplaces, one in each major room, including bedrooms. These require even more wood, even more attention, even more labour. Servants or enslaved people often bear the burden of keeping all these fires burning, rising earlier than anyone else to ensure the family wakes to warmth. In poorer homes, the single hearth does everything, and the entire family sleeps in the same room to share its heat. Neither arrangement is comfortable by your modern standards, but both are normal here. Let's pause on a small but telling detail, the tinder box. This little container, usually metal, sits on your mantel or hangs near the hearth. Inside you keep your fire-starting supplies, a piece of flint, a steel striker, and char cloth. Fabric that has been partially burned to make it catch sparks easily. If your fire dies completely, this tinderbox is your salvation. The process of striking flint against steel, catching a spark on char cloth, transferring that tiny ember to a bundle of dry tinder, and blowing it into flame requires patience, skill, and steady hands. On a cold morning when you're shivering and frustrated, it can feel nearly impossible. You guard your embers carefully. You never let the fire die if you can help it. And when you visit neighbours or travel, you often borrow fire rather than start your own, carrying a burning coal in a covered container or simply timing your journey so you arrive when someone else's fire is already burning. The smoke from your fire carries upward through the chimney, but not all of it escapes. Colonial homes often smell of smoke. Your clothing smells of it, your hair carries it. Visitors from the future would notice it immediately. The walls gradually darken from soot. The inside of the chimney becomes coated with crete, the flammable residue that builds up and occasionally catches fire itself, sending flames roaring up the flue. Chimney fires are terrifying events, the whole structure shaking as fire consumes the build-up inside. Cleaning chimneys is essential but difficult work, often done by children small enough to climb inside or by pulling weighted brushes down from the top. You've been kneeling here, tending the fire for several minutes now. The flames have grown strong, the room has begun to warm slightly, and the first grey light of dawn is now clearly visible through the small windows. Other members of your household are stirring, emerging from beds and blankets, drawn toward the heat you've created. Someone begins to prepare the morning meal. Someone else gathers supplies for the day's work. The fire has done its job. It has transformed your house from a cold, dark box into something livable. But you cannot rest. The fire demands constant vigilance. Throughout the day, someone must add wood, adjust pots, redistribute coals. At night, before the household retires, someone must bank the fire carefully, covering the coals with ash to preserve them until morning. The relationship between your family and this hearth is ongoing, intimate and inescapable. It is the heartbeat of your home, the central fact around which everything else revolves. As you stand and stretch, feeling the warmth on your face one last time before turning to the cold chores that await, you understand something that your distant descendants will forget. Fire is not a convenience. Fire is a responsibility, a companion, a tyrant, and a friend. It shapes your schedule, determines your architecture, influences your social patterns, and demands your constant attention. Without it, you would quickly die. With it, you can survive, even, on the best days, thrive. The day is brightening outside, the animals are calling, but for this moment you stand in the glow of the hearth, grateful for its warmth, aware of its dangers, and ready to face whatever comes next. The warmth of the fire still clings to your skin as you turn toward the business of breakfast, that first meal which must happen before the true labour of the day begins. But let's be clear about something right away. Breakfast in colonial America looks nothing like what you're imagining. There are no eggs sunny side up, no crispy bacon arranged on a plate, no toast popping from a machine, no coffee brewing with the push of a button. What you're about to eat is simpler, heavier, and prepared entirely over the open flames you've just finished tending. The most common breakfast across much of colonial America is some variation of porridge or mush, cornmeal, oatmeal, or whatever grain is available, boiled in water or milk until it reaches a thick, filling consistency. In New England, you might call it hasty pudding. In the middle colonies, it might be soup-horn. In the south, hominy grits serve a similar purpose. The names change, the grains vary slightly, but the principle remains constant. You need something warm, cheap, and packed with calories to fuel the grueling physical labour ahead. The pot hangs over the fire, suspended by an iron hook that allows you to adjust its height above the flames. Getting the temperature right is an art form. Too close and the bottom scorches, leaving you with a burnt crust that's nearly impossible to clean. Too far and the mush never properly thickens, remaining a watery disappointment that won't stick to your ribs. You've learned through years of practice exactly where the pot should hang, how often to stir, how the bubbles should look when it's nearly ready. While the mush cooks, other elements of breakfast emerge. If you're fortunate enough to have preserved meat, perhaps salt pork or bacon that's been smoked and stored, a slice might be cut and fried in a pan. It's rendered fat saved for cooking later or spread on bread as a substitute for butter. The smell of that meat sizzling is probably the most appetizing part of your morning, one of the few sensory pleasures in what is otherwise a fairly austere culinary existence. If you have bread, it might be yesterday's loaf, slightly stale now, toasted on a fork held near the flames, or simply eaten as is with whatever you can spread on it. Here's a detail that might make you appreciate your modern refrigerator. Butter in the 1700s is a seasonal product. During the warm months when cows are producing plentiful milk, butter is more available. During winter it's scarce or non-existent unless carefully preserved. Packed in crocks, covered in brine, stored in the coldest corner of the cellar and hoped for the best. The butter you might eat this morning, if you have any at all, could be months old, slightly rancid by modern standards, its flavour strong in ways that might turn your contemporary stomach. But you've grown up eating it this way. You don't notice anything wrong. Milk itself presents challenges. Without refrigeration, fresh milk sours quickly, especially in warm weather. You drink it soon after milking or not at all. More often, milk is transformed into something more stable. Cheese, butter, clabber. A kind of naturally soured milk product that was actually quite popular. The tall, cold glass of fresh milk that modern breakfast cereal commercials would have you pour is not part of your reality. What comes from the cow this morning might be consumed warm and fresh if you're lucky, or it might already be on its way to becoming something else entirely. Now, let's discuss the beverages. Coffee exists in colonial America, but it's expensive, and not yet the universal morning ritual it will become. Tea is more common, at least until the political situation makes drinking it a statement of loyalty to the crown. But that's a complication for another time. What you're most likely drinking this morning is cider, beer, or simply water. And yes, beer at breakfast. This isn't the heavy craft ale you might imagine. It's small beer, a low-alcohol beverage brewed from the second or third runnings of the mash, weak enough that children drink it too. Water supplies in colonial America are often questionable, contaminated with all manner of things you'd rather not think about. And alcohol, even in small amounts, helps kill pathogens. Historians still argue whether colonial Americans understood the science behind this, or simply learned through experience that fermented beverages were safer than raw water. The family gathers around the table, assuming you have a table. Poorer households might eat standing or sitting on stools and benches with no table at all, balancing bowls on laps. The table itself, if present, is rough-hewn wood, scarred from years of use, possibly covered with a cloth if your family has such niceties. Chairs are expensive, often reserved for the head of household. Everyone else sits on stools or benches. The idea that each person has their own designated seat with a matching chair is another future luxury. Your bowl, probably wooden, possibly pewter if your family has some wealth, receives a ladleful of mush. There may be molasses drizzled on top, that dark, sticky sweetener produced from Caribbean sugarcane and shipped up the coast. Molasses is more affordable than refined sugar, which remains expensive throughout the colonial period. The sweetness cuts through the bland grain, makes the whole thing almost pleasant. You eat quickly because the day is not waiting, because the light is growing outside the windows, because there is simply too much to do. Here's something that might amuse you. Table manners in colonial America are simultaneously strict and strange. Among the wealthier classes, elaborate rules govern who sits where, who is served first, how food should be passed and consumed. Among the common folk, manners are simpler but still present. You don't grab food from someone else's portion, you don't speak with your mouth full, you show respect to elders. But some practices that would horrify modern sensibilities are perfectly normal. Sharing drinking vessels is common. Wiping your hands on the tablecloth is acceptable in some circles. And the concept of germs, the idea that invisible organisms might be transmitted from person to person through shared food and drink, doesn't exist yet. You eat from the same pot as everyone else, drink from the same cup, and think nothing of it. The kitchen space where this breakfast is prepared deserves attention. In many colonial homes there is no separate kitchen. All cooking happens in the main living space, right there at the hearth, around which everything centres. In wealthier homes or in warmer southern climates, the kitchen might be a separate outbuilding, connected to the main house by a covered walkway, or simply standing apart. This separation helps keep cooking heat and smells and fire risk away from living quarters. But it also means food must be carried from one building to another, often cooling significantly before it reaches the table. The implements used to cook and eat this breakfast are themselves worth considering. Cast iron dominates. Pots, pans, kettles, all made from heavy iron that requires seasoning and care to maintain. Wooden utensils are common, spoons, ladles, bowls turned on a lathe or carved by hand. Metal utensils, especially silver, are rare and valuable, often passed down through generations as treasured heirlooms. You probably eat with a spoon. Forks are less common than you might expect, especially in rural households, and when present they often have only two tines. Knives are personal items, often carried on your person and used for everything from eating to daily tasks. As you scrape the last of the mush from your bowl, as you chase the final smear of molasses with your spoon, you're also preparing mentally for the work ahead. Breakfast in colonial America is not leisure, it's fuel. You eat to work and you work very soon after eating. There's no lingering over a second cup of coffee, no lazy scanning of the morning newspaper. Newspapers are rare, expensive, and arrive irregularly. Most households don't have them at all. You eat, you finish, you rise, and you begin. The fire has been tended throughout the meal, someone keeping an eye on it even while eating. The dirty dishes, such as they are, mostly just bowls and spoons, will be dealt with later, or not at all. Water is precious, scrubbing is labour, and the same bowl that served breakfast will likely serve dinner without much cleaning in between. This is not slovenliness. This is practicality. Every drop of water was carried by hand. Every moment spent cleaning is a moment not spent on other essential tasks. Outside, the light has grown strong enough to work by. Through the small windows you can see the farmyard taking shape, the outbuildings, the fences, the animals moving about, the trees beyond. The world is waking up, and it expects you to join it. Your stomach is full, your body is warm from the fire and the hot food, and you have perhaps a brief moment of contentment before the endless labour of colonial existence reasserts itself. Someone hands you a bucket. Someone else is already heading toward the barn. The morning chores that cannot wait another minute are calling. But as you move toward the door, you carry with you the warmth of that simple breakfast, that mush and meat and molasses, that fuel that will have to sustain you until the midday meal many hours from now. This is how your day begins every day in a world without electricity, without convenience, without any of the thousand small luxuries you once took for granted. It is hard, it is repetitive, and it is, in its own way, deeply human. The door opens and the cold morning air hits your face like a reminder that comfort was temporary. You're holding a bucket, maybe 2 buckets, one in each hand, and you're heading toward water because water doesn't come to you in this world. There are no pipes hidden in your walls, no faucets waiting to be turned, no magical system that delivers clean water on demand. Every single drop of water your family uses today must be physically hauled from somewhere else to wherever you need it. If you're lucky, you have a well. The well might be close to your house, just a few dozen steps across the yard, or it might be farther, shared with neighbours, located where the water table happened to be accessible when someone dug it years or decades ago. The well has a wooden cover to keep debris and animals out, and depending on its design, you either lower a bucket on a rope and haul it back up by hand, or you have a slightly more sophisticated arrangement with a windlass or a sweep. A long pole balanced on a fulcrum that makes raising the heavy bucket somewhat easier on your arms and back. The bucket goes down into the darkness. You hear the splash as it hits water far below. Wells can be quite deep, sometimes 30 or 40 feet, sometimes more. The rope goes taut as the bucket fills, and then the work begins, hauling that weight upward, hand over hand if there's no mechanical assistance, or turning the windlass if there is, feeling the strain in your shoulders and forearms with every rotation. A full bucket of water weighs roughly 8 pounds per gallon. A typical bucket might hold 2 or 3 gallons. You're hauling 20 pounds or more of dead weight up from the depths, and you'll do this many, many times today. Because here's the thing about water in colonial America. You need astonishing quantities of it. Drinking, obviously. Your family needs water to survive, and animals need even more. Cooking requires water. Cleaning, when it happens, requires water. Laundry, that occasional, exhausting ordeal, requires enormous amounts of water, heated over the fire, which means the fire also needs feeding while the water heats. Any livestock you keep needs water multiple times a day. Your kitchen garden needs water if rain hasn't been sufficient. Water for making soap. Water for brewing. Water for mixing mortar if you're doing any construction. Water, 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 all of it carried by human arms from source to destination. If you don't have a well, your situation is harder. You might be hauling water from a spring, which could be a significant distance from your home. You might be fetching it from a stream or river, which introduces concerns about purity and contamination. You might be collecting rainwater in barrels when the weather cooperates, though this supply is obviously unreliable. In coastal areas, you must be careful not to accidentally draw brackish water contaminated with salt. In areas where other families share water sources, you might have to wait your turn or negotiate access. Water rights in colonial America were serious business, and disputes over well access could escalate into genuine conflicts. The quality of the water itself is something you try not to think about too carefully. Wells can be contaminated by nearby outhouses. Remember, you don't understand germ theory yet, so the connection between waste seeping into groundwater and illness in those who drink it is not obvious. Streams carry runoff from farmland, from other people's waste, from dead animals decomposing upstream. Stagnant water breeds mosquitoes, though you don't yet understand that mosquitoes carry disease. Historians still argue about just how significant water contamination was in colonial mortality rates, but most agree that bad water killed plenty of people who never understood what was making them sick. This is part of why you drink so much cider and beer, which we mentioned at breakfast. The fermentation process produces enough alcohol to kill many pathogens, making these beverages genuinely safer than plain water in many circumstances. You're not drinking to get drunk. The alcohol content of small beer is quite low. You're drinking to stay alive. Children drink it. Pregnant women drink it. It's water that happens to be somewhat purified by accident. Your buckets are full now, water sloshing as you lift them from the well housing. You turn back toward the house, one bucket in each hand, arms already beginning to feel the strain. The ground between the well and your door is well worn from this path being walked thousands of times. In wet weather it turns to mud. In winter it might be icy and treacherous. You've learned to navigate it in all conditions because you have no choice. Inside, the water goes where it's needed, some into a large pot over the fire to heat for washing or cooking, some into a smaller vessel for drinking throughout the day, some set aside for tasks yet to be determined. You might make this trip to the well half a dozen times before noon, more if something unusual is happening, guests arriving, laundry being done, animals being particularly thirsty. On laundry days, which happen perhaps once a week or once a month depending on your household's practices, you might haul water for hours, eating batch after batch, your arms growing leaden, your back screaming. And let's talk about carrying water in different seasons. In summer, the trip to the well offers a brief respite from the heat. Water drawn from deep in the ground is cool, refreshing. But summer also means more demand. Thirstier animals, thirstier people, more cooking to preserve the season's abundance before it spoils. In winter, the ordeal is worse in different ways. The ground is frozen and slippery. The cold bites at your hands as you grip the rope or handle the windlass. If the winter is severe enough, the well itself might freeze over, requiring you to break ice before you can draw water. Your fingers go numb, your nose runs, and still the water must be fetched. Here's a small mercy that colonial households learn to build into their routines. You don't waste water. Every drop is earned through labour, so every drop is valued. Washing water gets reused. The same basin of water might wash faces, then hands, then be used for some other cleaning task, then finally poured out onto the garden where it can do some last bit of good. Cooking water is saved when possible, the nutrients leached from vegetables becoming the base for tomorrow's soup. Even the animals drink from troughs that are carefully managed, not just left to overflow and waste. The children of the household learn to carry water almost as soon as they can walk. Smaller buckets, shorter distances at first, but this is a task that everyone participates in because there's simply too much water needed for any one person to manage alone. Older children might be sent to fetch water independently, freeing adults for other tasks. In this way, fetching water becomes one of the first real responsibilities of young life in colonial America, a daily demonstration that everyone must contribute to the household's survival. Your arms are tired and the sun has barely risen, but the water is fetched, at least this round of it, and now other tasks demand attention. The animals need tending, the fire needs feeding. The rhythm of the day is establishing itself, one small victory at a time, one bucket at a time. What strikes you, if you stop to think about it, is how much of colonial existence revolves around transporting things. Water from the well to the house, wood from the woodpile to the fire, food from the garden to the kitchen, waste from the house to wherever waste goes. You're constantly moving, constantly carrying, constantly serving, as the infrastructure that modern life would eventually automate with pipes and wires and machines. Your body is the pump, the conveyor belt, the delivery system, and it never stops. But there's no time for philosophical reflection now. The bucket is empty again, already needing refilling. The day is moving forward whether you're ready or not. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you're already calculating how many more trips to the well lie ahead before you can finally rest tonight. You set down the water buckets inside the door and turn your attention to something you've been putting off, getting properly dressed for the day ahead. Earlier, in the pre-dawn darkness, you pulled on enough clothing to be decent and to tend the fire, but now with the light growing and the full scope of your tasks becoming clear, you need to complete the process. Dressing in colonial America is not simple. It's not grabbing a t-shirt and jeans. It's a ritual involving multiple layers, specific techniques, and garments that require genuine skill to produce. Let's start with what touches your skin: linen. The shift if you're a woman, the shirt if you're a man. This undergarment is made from flax fibres, laboriously processed through a series of steps that transform a flowering plant into wearable fabric. Someone, probably women of your household, or perhaps women from whom you purchased the cloth, grew the flax, harvested it, retted it in water to rot away the outer fibres, dried it, broke it to separate the usable strands, scutched it to remove woody particles, hackled it through comb-like tools, spun the resulting fibres into thread, and wove that thread into cloth. The process takes months, sometimes years when you account for growing seasons and the time required for each step. The linen against your skin represents an almost unimaginable investment of labour. Over the shift or shirt come the structural garments. For women, this means stays, a bodice stiffened with reeds, whalebone, or heavy cording that provides support and shapes the torso into the fashionable silhouette of the era. Contrary to popular belief, these stays are not necessarily uncomfortable when properly fitted. They distribute weight, support the bust, and help with posture during the long physical labour of the day. But they are restrictive. Bending is different when wearing stays. Breathing is different. Your body moves within this rigid framework rather than completely freely. For men, the equivalent layer involves breeches, knee-length pants made from wool, linen or leather depending on the task at hand and the season. These fasten at the waist and again just below the knee, where they meet stockings. The fly is not a zipper, as zippers don't exist yet, but a full front, a flap that buttons or ties at the sides, requiring a specific technique to unfasten when nature calls. Stockings for both men and women are long, pulled up over the knee and secured with garters or ribbons. They're usually knitted, either purchased from specialists or produced at home during the long winter evenings when outdoor work is limited. Knitting is a skill almost everyone possesses to some degree, and stockings wear out quickly enough that you're always making more. The feet take particular abuse, and it's not uncommon to darn holes repeatedly until the original stocking is more repair than original material. Here's a quirky detail. Pockets in colonial women's clothing are not sewn into garments. They're separate bags, tied around the waist and accessed through slits in the outer skirts. These pockets hang between the petticoat and the gown, hidden from view but accessible when needed. They're essentially pouches carried under your clothes, and women often keep all manner of essential items in them: sewing supplies, keys, coins, small tools, snacks for children. The pocket is your personal storage, your private space, and losing one is a genuine catastrophe. The outer garments vary by gender, region, and social class. Women typically wear petticoats, which are not underwear in the modern sense, but rather skirts, often multiple layers for warmth. And over these a gown, jacket, or short gown, depending on the task at hand. For heavy work, you might strip down to just shift and petticoat, stay still providing support, but the outer gown set aside to avoid soiling it, or catching it on something. Men wear waistcoats, sleeved or sleeveless vests that button up the front, and over these, coats with long skirts and turned-back cuffs. All of these garments are fastened with buttons, hooks, ties, or pins. Getting dressed takes time. Getting undressed takes time. This is part of why people don't change clothes multiple times a day. Each change requires effort, and effort is a limited resource. You dress in the morning and stay dressed until bed, adjusting layers as needed for warmth or work, but not fundamentally changing your outfit. The colours and fabrics of your clothing speak volumes about your social position. The wealthy wear fine woolens and imported silks in deep, rich colours produced by expensive dyes. The middling sort wear serviceable wool and linen in browns, blues and greys. The poor wear whatever they can afford, often undyed natural fibres in shades of beige and grey, patched and mended until the original garment is barely recognisable. Historians still argue about exactly how much you could tell about a person's class and occupation from their clothing at a glance, but the consensus is quite a lot. The fabric itself comes from remarkably few sources compared to modern variety. Wool from sheep, linen from flax, cotton from the southern colonies or imported from abroad, silk for the wealthy, leather for working garments and shoes. That's essentially it. The synthetic fabrics that will eventually dominate the modern wardrobe don't exist yet. No polyester, no nylon, no spandex. Everything against your skin is natural fibre, and natural fibre behaves differently than what you might be used to. Wool holds warmth even when wet. Linen breathes well in summer, but wrinkles terribly. Cotton requires significant processing before it becomes wearable. Each fabric has properties you learn to work with and around. Shoes deserve special mention. Your feet are shod in leather, hard leather, stiff leather, leather that has been minimally processed compared to the soft, supple material of modern footwear. The shoes are made on straight lasts, meaning there's no left or right. Both shoes are identical, gradually conforming to your feet through wear. Breaking in new shoes is genuinely painful, involving blisters and sore spots that eventually callus over. Many people, especially in rural areas, go barefoot during warm months to save their shoes for when they're truly needed. Now you're dressed, finally, fully, ready to face whatever the day demands. But consider what this morning ritual represents. Hours of labour condensed into the garments on your body. Months of growing and processing flax. Seasons of shepherding and shearing sheep. Days of spinning and weaving and cutting and sewing. Every item you're wearing is handmade, often by people you know personally, often by members of your own household. When these clothes wear out, and they will, faster than you'd like, someone must produce more. This is the fundamental truth of clothing in the colonial era. It is scarce and precious. You own few garments. You care for them meticulously. You mend and patch and alter, and eventually cut them down into smaller items or rags when they can no longer serve their original purpose. The idea of a closet full of clothes, of discarding garments because you're tired of them, would strike your colonial self as absurd, almost obscene. What you wear, you earned through labour or through trade for things earned through labour. Nothing comes easily. Nothing is disposable. Outside, the day is bright now. The animals are calling. The garden needs tending. But you're dressed, properly dressed, armoured against the world in layers of linen and wool that someone's hands made for you. It's time to work. The youngest child tugs at your sleeve as you move toward the door, asking a question about breakfast, about a toy, about something trivial that seems terribly important in a 5-year-old's world. You answer briefly, not unkindly, but without the patient, extended engagement a modern parent might offer. There's too much to do. And besides, this child has responsibilities too. That's the nature of childhood in colonial America. It's brief, practical, and surprisingly full of labour. The concept of childhood as we understand it today, a protected period of play and learning, of nurturing and gradual development, stretching well into the teenage years, simply doesn't exist in the 1700s. Children are small adults. They dress in miniature versions of adult clothing. They're expected to behave with adult decorum, and they work alongside adults, almost from the moment they can reliably follow instructions. Your 5-year-old, for instance, has chores. Real chores with real consequences. They might be responsible for gathering eggs from the henhouse each morning, carrying water in a small bucket, watching younger siblings, feeding chickens, pulling weeds in the garden, or running messages between family members working in different locations. These tasks aren't assigned as character-building exercises or to teach responsibility in some abstract sense. They're assigned because the family needs them done and lacks the surplus labour to do them any other way. A child who doesn't work is a drain on resources the family can't afford. By age 7 or 8, the division of labour begins to split along gender lines more distinctly. Girls start learning the domestic arts that will define their adult lives: cooking, cleaning, spinning, knitting, sewing, preserving food, tending younger children. They work alongside their mothers, aunts, and older sisters, absorbing skills through observation and practice. Boys begin accompanying their fathers to the fields, the workshop, the forest where wood is cut. They learn to plough, to plant, to harvest, to care for larger livestock, to handle tools that could maim or kill if misused. Here's something that might startle you. Formal schooling, if it exists at all, is sporadic and secondary to work. In New England, where Puritan values emphasize literacy so that everyone can read the Bible, schools are more common. But even there, attendance is irregular. Children come when work permits, leave when work demands. In other regions, schools are rare or non-existent. Many colonial Americans, particularly in rural areas and in the southern colonies, grow up barely literate or entirely illiterate. What education they receive comes from parents, from ministers, from the oral transmission of knowledge that characterizes pre-industrial societies. The children who do attend school face conditions that would horrify modern educators. The one-room schoolhouse, heated by a single stove or fireplace, contains students of all ages crowded onto hard benches. Discipline is physical, a switch or rod applied to the hands, back or backside for misbehaviour or failure to learn. Lessons emphasize rote memorization, multiplication tables chanted in unison, Bible verses committed to memory, the alphabet drilled until it becomes automatic. Critical thinking, creativity, individual expression, these are not educational priorities. What matters is practical knowledge and moral formation. Historians still argue about childhood mortality rates in colonial America, but the consensus is grim. Perhaps 1 in 4 children died before reaching adulthood. Diseases we now prevent with vaccines swept through communities carrying away the young, accidents on farms and in workshops killed or maimed, childbirth complications affected both mothers and infants. If you're a parent in colonial America, you've likely lost at least one child. If you're a child, you've likely lost at least one sibling. Death is not a distant abstract concept. It's a frequent visitor to homes where you know the occupants. This proximity to death shapes how colonial Americans relate to their children. Historians debate whether parents in this era loved their children less intensely than modern parents do, whether the constant threat of loss created emotional distance as a form of psychological protection. The evidence is mixed. Letters and diaries from the period reveal genuine grief when children die, deep affection expressed in quiet moments. But there's also a pragmatism, a recognition that attachment must be balanced against the very real possibility of loss. Children's play exists, but it's wedged into the margins of working life. There are dolls, often simple ones made from corn husks, rags, or carved wood. There are balls and hoops and spinning tops. There are games played in groups, tag, hide and seek, variations of what would become baseball and other sports. But playtime is limited, snatched during brief breaks or in the diminishing light of evening when work is done. The extensive childhood play that modern developmental psychology considers essential is a luxury most colonial children cannot afford. Adolescence as a distinct life stage doesn't really exist either. There's childhood, and then there's adulthood, with a relatively quick transition between them. A girl might be considered marriageable at 14 or 15. A boy might be apprenticed out at 12 or 13, leaving his family to live with and learn from a master craftsman for 7 years. The teenage period of identity exploration, of finding oneself, of rebellion and experimentation. These are modern inventions. In colonial America, you know who you are by the time you're 15. You're a farmer's daughter learning to run a household, or a craftsman's son learning a trade, or a labourer in training, your path largely determined by your birth. The children you're looking at now, your siblings, your own offspring, the neighbours' kids running through the yard, are participating in a system that seems harsh by modern standards, but functioned reasonably well within its context. They're learning through doing. They're contributing to their family's survival. They're developing skills and resilience that will serve them throughout lives that demand constant physical labour and frequent adaptation to hardship. One more thing about colonial children that might surprise you: the clothes. Until somewhere around age 4 to 6, regardless of gender, children wear long gowns or dresses. This isn't about gender expression, it's about practicality. Small children aren't yet fully toilet trained by modern standards, and a long gown is easier to lift than pants are to remove. Once children reach the age where they can reliably manage their own toilet needs and are ready to take on more serious work, they're breeched, if boys, and begin wearing the gendered clothing of their respective futures. The 5-year-old at your sleeve is one of these small workers, dressed in a long gown, expected to contribute but not yet fully integrated into the adult labour force. In a few years, everything will change, but for now, they exist in a brief liminal space between infancy and productive childhood, learning the rhythms of colonial life through observation and small tasks. You send them off to gather eggs, watching their small form toddle toward the henhouse, then you turn to your own work, which is heavier, more demanding, and cannot wait any longer. There's a pressure building in your lower abdomen, and you've been ignoring it for the last hour because other tasks seemed more pressing. But now it's demanding attention. You need to relieve yourself, and this need introduces you to one of the least glamorous aspects of colonial existence: bathroom facilities, or rather, the remarkable absence of them. Let's be absolutely clear about something. Indoor plumbing does not exist in your world. There are no toilets, no flushing mechanisms, no sewage pipes carrying waste safely away from your living space. There is instead an outhouse, if you're fortunate enough to have one, and a chamber pot for those times when trudging outside simply isn't feasible. The outhouse sits some distance from your home, far enough that its odours don't overwhelm your living space, close enough that the walk isn't unbearable in bad weather. It's a small wooden structure, roughly the size of a modern closet, containing a bench with one or more holes cut into it, positioned over a pit dug into the earth. The construction is simple: walls to block the wind and provide minimal privacy, a roof to keep out rain and snow, perhaps a crescent moon or star cut into the door for ventilation and light. You approach the outhouse now, pulling open the creaky wooden door, confronting the smell that no amount of lime or ash, both commonly sprinkled into the pit to reduce odour and decomposition, can fully eliminate. The bench is rough against your skin as you arrange your clothing. Remember those multiple layers we discussed, and settle into position. There is no comfortable way to do this. The seat is cold in winter, sometimes hot in summer. Spiders and other insects often make their homes in the dark corners. The smell is inescapable. Privacy is relative. The outhouse provides visual privacy from the outside world, but the walls are thin and sounds carry. In a busy household, someone might be waiting for you to finish. In communal situations, taverns for instance, multiple people might use the facilities simultaneously. Some larger outhouses have multiple holes positioned side by side, a feature that seems almost unimaginable to modern sensibilities, but was entirely practical in its context. And then there's the matter of cleaning yourself afterward. Toilet paper does not exist. What you use instead varies. Corn cobs are common in rural areas, their rough surface is effective if uncomfortable. Newspaper pages or almanac pages serve when paper is available, and you're willing to sacrifice it for this purpose. In some regions and social classes, moss, leaves or wool scraps fill the role. Wealthier households might use fabric rags that are then laundered, a practice that sounds disgusting until you remember that modern cloth diapers work on similar principles. The chamber pot serves as the nighttime alternative to the outhouse, because nobody wants to stumble through darkness across a cold yard in the middle of the night. It's a simple ceramic or metal container kept under the bed or in a corner used when necessary. In the morning, someone, usually a woman or servant, must empty it. The contents go into the outhouse pit or sometimes directly onto the garden. Human waste makes effective fertilizer, though you don't want to think too carefully about this when eating your vegetables. Here's where things get complicated for women. Menstruation. There are no commercial sanitary products, no discreet packages at the drugstore. Women use rags, folded fabric pinned into undergarments, which must then be washed and reused. The process is uncomfortable, inconvenient, and conducted in as much secrecy as possible. Menstruation is not discussed openly. It's considered shameful, dirty, something to be hidden. Many women suffer through cramps and discomfort without any pain relief, beyond folk remedies of dubious effectiveness. Historians still argue about whether menstrual cycles were more or less regular in colonial America, given different diets, activity levels, and health conditions, but the experience was certainly harder without modern conveniences. The absence of proper sanitation has consequences beyond mere inconvenience. Diseases spread easily when human waste contaminates water supplies, when hands aren't properly washed, when chamber pots are emptied carelessly. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera. These killers thrive in environments where sanitation is poor. You don't understand the mechanism of disease transmission yet, but you've seen neighbours sicken and die from ailments that spread through households like wildfire. The connection to sanitation is invisible to you, but it's there nonetheless. Bathing, by the way, is infrequent and minimal. The idea of a daily shower or bath is centuries away. Water must be hauled and heated. Remember those laborious trips to the well, that fire constantly demanding fuel. And the effort simply isn't justified for full-body washing on any regular basis. Instead, you wash your hands and face, perhaps your feet, using a basin of water and a cloth. Full immersion bathing happens perhaps a few times a year, if that, and some colonists believe it's actually dangerous. That opening the pores through warm water exposes the body to disease. This belief is not universal, and bathing practices vary by region, religion and social class, but nobody in colonial America is showering daily. Your clothing absorbs sweat and odour. Your hair grows oily. Your skin develops a patina of accumulated grime. This is simply normal. Everyone smells, so nobody particularly notices. The perfumed, deodorized, frequently showered body of the modern era would strike colonial Americans as strange, possibly unhealthy, definitely extravagant. What's remarkable, perhaps, is how quickly you adapt to these conditions. Within weeks of arriving in colonial America, if you could magically transport yourself there, you would stop noticing the smells, the discomforts, the indignities. They would become background noise, the unremarkable reality of daily existence. The outhouse would simply be where you go, the chamber pot simply what you use at night. Bodies are bodies, and bodies have needs, and you meet those needs with whatever tools your era provides. You finish at the outhouse, rearrange your clothing, and step back into the morning air, which seems fresh and sweet by comparison. The sun has climbed higher. The day's work continues regardless of biological necessities. You don't think about the outhouse again until next time you need it, which might be hours from now or might be sooner depending on what you ate yesterday. This is life without plumbing. It's not elegant, but it works. It has to work. There is no alternative. The sound reaches your ears before you've made it halfway back from the outhouse. The insistent lowing of cattle, the impatient bleating of goats, the cacophony of chickens announcing their morning displeasure. The animals know it's past time for their feeding, and they're making their opinions known. You quicken your pace because hungry livestock is both noisy and potentially destructive, and because these animals represent wealth, security and survival that you cannot afford to neglect. In colonial America, the animals you keep aren't pets. They're not companions kept for emotional support or aesthetic pleasure. They are tools, investments, and food sources. Every creature on your property serves a purpose, and your relationship with them is fundamentally transactional. You feed and shelter them, and in return, they provide labour, products, or their very bodies for your sustenance. The cow, if you're fortunate enough to have one, is perhaps the most valuable single animal on the property. She provides milk which can be consumed directly, transformed into butter and cheese, or fed to calves and hogs. Her manure fertilises your fields. When she's too old to produce, she becomes beef and leather. A family with a cow is a family with options. A family without one struggles constantly for protein and fat. But the cow must be milked twice daily, morning and evening without exception. Miss a milking and her udder becomes painfully engorged, potentially leading to infection. The milk itself spoils within hours in warm weather if not processed. So here you are every single morning crouching on a low stool beside the cow's warm flank, your hands working the familiar rhythm of squeeze and pull, the milk hissing into the wooden bucket in thin white streams. Milking is not difficult once you know how, but it requires presence. You cannot automate it. You cannot schedule it for a more convenient time. The cow's biology dictates your schedule, not the other way around. This is a pattern you'll recognise throughout colonial animal husbandry. The animals' needs structure your days as much as your own needs do. The pigs come next, grunting and shoving as you approach their enclosure with a bucket of scraps. Vegetable peelings, spoiled food, the whey left over from cheese making, anything organic that humans won't eat. Pigs are nature's garbage disposals, converting waste into meat with remarkable efficiency. They're also intelligent, stubborn, and occasionally dangerous. A large hog can knock down a person, can bite hard enough to break bone. You treat them with respect, keeping the fence sturdy between you and them. Pigs require relatively little care compared to other livestock. They're hardy, adaptable, willing to eat almost anything, but they must be kept contained. A loose pig will destroy a garden in minutes, rooting through carefully tended vegetables with gleeful abandon. They'll wander into neighbours' properties and cause trouble. In some colonial towns, ordinances require pigs to be kept penned or ringed through the nose to prevent rooting. The penalties for loose pigs can be significant. The sheep, if you have them, are woolly problems and solutions rolled into one. They provide fleece for clothing. That linen and wool you're wearing required raw materials from somewhere. But sheep are vulnerable, stupid, and prone to wandering into danger. They must be protected from predators, sheared at the appropriate season, treated for various ailments, and generally shepherded through lives they seem determined to make difficult. Goats are hardier than sheep, but more mischievous. They'll eat almost anything, including things you'd rather they didn't. Laundry left to dry, young trees, garden plants. Their milk is nutritious, their meat edible, their hides useful, but managing them requires constant vigilance against escape and destruction. The chickens are perhaps the easiest livestock to keep, requiring minimal space and able to subsist largely on bugs and scraps. But they must be protected from predators, foxes, hawks, raccoons, and the family dog, who might decide chicken dinner sounds appealing. Their eggs must be collected daily before they spoil or get eaten by something else. Their housing must be maintained, cleaned of accumulated droppings that would otherwise foster disease. Here's a detail that might surprise you. Many colonial Americans let their chickens roam freely during the day, scratching through the yard and fields, returning to the henhouse at dusk. This free-range approach makes the eggs tastier and the birds healthier, but it also means eggs are laid in hidden nests that must be found, and predators have easier access. Each approach, confinement versus free range, involves trade-offs your family has negotiated based on circumstances. Beyond the domestic animals, you might also be dealing with draft animals, horses or oxen used for ploughing, hauling, and transportation. These are expensive to acquire and expensive to maintain. A horse needs quantities of hay that could otherwise feed sheep or cattle, but they dramatically increase what a single family can accomplish. A man with a horse can work more land than a man without one. A family with an ox can haul timber that would otherwise be impossible to move. The animals also serve as your alarm system, your weather predictors, and your companions in isolation. A dog barks at approaching strangers. Chickens act strangely before storms. The cow's behaviour signals changes in weather you haven't yet noticed yourself. And in the long, lonely stretches between human visitors, the animals provide something like company, creatures to speak to, presences that respond to your voice, lives that depend on yours. By the time you finish the morning animal chores, Milking completed, pigs fed, chickens released and eggs collected, larger livestock checked and watered. A significant portion of daylight has already passed. The sun has climbed well above the horizon. Your arms are tired, your hands smell of milk and manure, and your stomach is reminding you that breakfast was hours ago. But the animals are content for now, their immediate needs met, their contribution to your survival secured for another day. This is the bargain you've struck, their lives for your labour. It's demanding, unromantic, and absolutely essential. The animal chores complete, you turn toward a different kind of tending, quieter, more delicate, but equally essential to your family's survival. Just outside the kitchen door, occupying the sunniest and most protected spot in the yard, sits the kitchen garden. And this small patch of cultivated earth keeps your family fed in ways the larger fields cannot. The kitchen garden is a woman's domain in colonial America, though everyone helps when needed. Here grow the vegetables and herbs used daily in cooking. Beans climbing up poles, squash spreading across the ground, cabbages forming tight heads, onions and garlic pushing up through the soil. There are herbs for flavouring food, parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme, the same ones that will eventually appear in a famous song. And crucially, there are medicinal plants, chamomile for calming nerves, feverfew for headaches, lavender for wounds, dozens of others whose uses you know intimately, but which modern medicine would view skeptically. You kneel in the soft earth now, pulling weeds that have appeared overnight with the persistence of all unwanted growing things. The weeds must go because they compete with your vegetables for nutrients, water, and light. Every weed allowed to flourish is food taken from your family's mouths. This is not gardening as hobby, this is gardening as survival. The soil in the kitchen garden receives special attention. It's enriched with manure from the animals, with ash from the fireplace, with kitchen scraps carefully composted. Unlike the larger fields, which might grow the same crop year after year until the soil is exhausted, the kitchen garden is pampered, rotated, restored. You understand, through generations of accumulated wisdom, that healthy soil produces healthy plants, even if you don't know the science of nitrogen cycles and microbial communities. What you're growing depends heavily on where you live. In New England, the short growing season limits options. Hardy crops that can be stored through winter dominate: turnips, carrots, beets, cabbages, winter squash. In the middle colonies, a wider variety thrives. In the south, the long hot summers allow different possibilities but also present different challenges. Heat wilts delicate greens, insects multiply in the warmth. Corn is grown both in the larger fields and sometimes in the kitchen garden, depending on your circumstances. This remarkable crop, inherited from indigenous American peoples who developed it over thousands of years, provides not just food for humans but feed for animals, stalks for construction materials, and husks for stuffing mattresses. Historians still argue about exactly how colonial Americans learned to grow corn successfully, whether indigenous knowledge was freely shared, stolen, or discovered independently through trial and error. What's certain is that corn became essential, a foundation of colonial American agriculture. The beans climbing those poles aren't just food. They're fixing nitrogen in the soil, restoring what corn depletes, a relationship indigenous farmers understood and practiced in the Three Sisters planting method long before colonists arrived. Squash spreading along the ground shades the soil, preventing weeds and retaining moisture. These three crops grown together, corn, beans, squash, form a system more productive than any single crop alone. Your hands are in the dirt now, pulling, transplanting, checking leaves for signs of disease or pest damage. A fat green caterpillar appears on a cabbage leaf, and you pluck it off, crushing it between your fingers without hesitation. Pesticides don't exist, so pest control is manual. You versus the insects every day, examining leaves, removing invaders, hoping they don't multiply faster than you can kill them. Water must reach this garden regardless of whether rain has fallen. We discussed hauling water from the well earlier. Some of that water comes here, carefully poured around the base of plants, trying to minimize waste while providing enough moisture to thrive. In dry spells, the garden consumes enormous quantities. In wet years, you worry about rot and mildew instead. The herbs deserve special attention because they serve functions beyond cooking. That lavender you're growing, it repels insects when scattered through clothing storage. The mint spreading aggressively across one corner, it settles upset stomachs and freshens breath. The rue with its distinctive bitter smell, It's believed to repel disease, hung in doorways during epidemics. These plants are your pharmacy, your household chemistry, your connection to knowledge passed from mother to daughter across generations. Here's something the modern mind might overlook: seeds. Every plant in this garden began as a seed, and seeds in colonial America are precious commodities. You cannot run to the hardware store for a packet of tomato seeds. You must save seeds from last year's plants, storing them carefully through winter, protecting them from mice and moisture, planting them at exactly the right time next spring. Some seeds you trade with neighbours, acquiring varieties you don't have. Some you might purchase from merchants who import them from Europe, but mostly seeds represent continuity, an unbroken chain from last year's garden to this year's to next year's, each generation of plants providing for the next. The kitchen garden also produces flowers, though these are rarely purely ornamental. Marigolds repel certain insects. Nasturtiums can be eaten, and also attract pests away from more valuable plants. Roses provide hips for tea and medicine. The beauty is real but secondary. Everything here must earn its place. You finish your weeding, your transplanting, your pest removal, and step back to survey the garden. It looks good. Healthy plants, well spaced, adequately watered for now. But you'll be back tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until frost kills what remains. The garden never stops demanding attention, just as the animals never stop, just as the fire never stops. This is the rhythm of colonial life. Endless small tasks, each one essential, accumulating into survival. Let's step back from the garden's fresh growth and address something darker but equally essential: the art and science of keeping food from killing you. In a world without refrigeration, without canning technology, without the sophisticated preservation methods that make modern food supplies safe, every meal is a negotiation with bacteria, every stored ingredient a potential source of sickness or death. The fundamental problem is simple: food spoils. The meat you slaughtered last week is already beginning to rot. The vegetables you harvested yesterday are starting to wilt. The milk you drew this morning will be sour by tonight. Without intervention, the bounty of summer becomes the poison of autumn, and you face winter with nothing safe to eat. Your ancestors developed solutions, none of them perfect, all of them involving trade-offs between taste, safety, labour and availability. These preservation methods are not quaint traditions. They're survival technologies perfected over centuries, essential to your continued existence. Salt is perhaps the most important tool in your preservation arsenal. Salt draws moisture from food, creating an environment where bacteria cannot thrive. Meat packed in salt, fish layered with salt, vegetables cured in brine, these can last months, sometimes years, without refrigeration. But salt is not free. It must be purchased, often from considerable distances, representing a significant expense for most families. The wealthy can salt lavishly. The poor must ration carefully, preserving only what's absolutely necessary. The salt pork and salt beef that sustain you through winter are intensely flavoured, far saltier than any modern palate would enjoy. Before cooking, you must soak the meat for hours or even days, leaching out excess salt until what remains is edible. The flavour is still strong, the texture somewhat altered from fresh meat, but it's food, and it won't kill you, and that's what matters. Smoking offers another preservation pathway. Meat or fish suspended in a smokehouse, exposed to continuous smoke for days or weeks, develops a hard outer layer that resists bacterial growth, while the smoke compounds themselves have antimicrobial properties. Smoked ham, smoked bacon, smoked fish. These can hang in your cellar or pantry for extended periods, sliced off as needed, contributing protein and flavour to meals throughout the lean months. The smokehouse itself is a simple structure, often just a small building or even a barrel with a fire pit beneath. The skill lies in maintaining the right temperature. Too hot and you cook the meat rather than smoking it. Too cold and smoking doesn't happen effectively, and in keeping the smoke going continuously for the required duration. This is another task demanding constant attention, another fire that cannot be allowed to die. Drying removes moisture through a different mechanism, exposure to sun and air. Thin slices of meat can become jerky, hard and chewy, but lasting indefinitely in the right conditions. Fish can be dried into stockfish. Fruits become the raisins, prunes and dried apples that provide sweetness through winter. Herbs hang in bundles from your ceiling beams, drying in the warm air rising from the hearth, their flavours concentrating as moisture escapes. Pickling uses acid, usually vinegar, to create conditions where harmful bacteria cannot survive. Cucumbers become pickles. Cabbage becomes sauerkraut. Onions, peppers, eggs, all manner of vegetables and proteins can be preserved in acidic solutions, their flavours transformed, their storage lives extended. The taste of pickling is distinctive, and you either learn to enjoy it or you go hungry. Here's where things get genuinely dangerous. Fermentation. Controlled fermentation produces delicious and safe products. Wine, beer, vinegar, sauerkraut, cheese. Uncontrolled fermentation produces toxins, sometimes deadly ones. The line between successful fermentation and poisonous failure is thin, and crossing it invisibly can sicken or kill an entire family. You learn the signs of good fermentation versus bad, the smells, the textures, the visual cues, and you discard anything suspicious without hesitation. The root cellar is your refrigerator, such as it is. Dug into the earth beneath or beside your house, insulated by soil, the root cellar maintains temperatures cool enough to slow spoilage, though not cold enough to stop it entirely. Here you store your root vegetables: potatoes, carrots, turnips, beets, packed in sand or straw to prevent them touching each other and spreading rot. Apples can last through winter in the root cellar. Cabbages hang from the ceiling. Barrels of cider slowly ferment into vinegar. But the root cellar is not foolproof. Temperatures fluctuate. One rotten apple really does spoil the barrel. The saying exists for a reason. You check your stores regularly, removing anything showing signs of decay before it can contaminate its neighbours. Mice and rats present constant threats, chewing through containers, contaminating food with droppings. The vigilance required is exhausting. The consequences of failure are severe. Spoiled food can make you sick. Contaminated food can kill you. Botulism, salmonella, listeria. You don't know these names, but you know their effects. Violent vomiting, bloody diarrhea, convulsions, death. Historians still argue about how many colonial deaths attributed to fever or stomach complaint were actually food poisoning, but the number is certainly substantial. You develop practices that seem superstitious to the modern eye, but actually make sense. Never eat pork in months without an R in the name, May through August, when heat accelerates spoilage. Trust your nose. If it smells bad, it is bad. When in doubt, throw it out. These folk rules are imperfect heuristics, but they reduce risk in an environment where risk cannot be eliminated. Every autumn is a frenzy of preservation activity. The slaughter of animals that cannot be fed through winter produces enormous quantities of meat that must be immediately processed. Salted, smoked, made into sausages, rendered into lard. The harvest brings vegetables and fruits that must be dried, pickled, stored before frost damages them. This work dominates weeks, sometimes months, and its success or failure determines whether your family eats well through winter or starves. You're living, essentially, in a constant negotiation with decomposition. Everything you produce wants to rot. Everything you eat must be saved from rotting. The skills required are complex, the stakes are life and death, and there are no shortcuts. The sun has reached its highest point in the sky, casting short shadows beneath your feet, and your stomach growls its approval of this celestial alignment. This is the hour of dinner. Not the evening meal you might associate with that word in modern usage, but the main meal of the day, eaten at midday when the light is strongest for cooking and eating. Supper, when it comes later, will be lighter, simpler, eaten in the dimming evening. But dinner is substantial, and you're ready for it. The logic behind this meal timing extends beyond mere tradition. Cooking requires light. You need to see what you're doing as you prepare food over an open fire, and the midday sun provides maximum illumination through the small windows of your home. Eating requires light too. You need to see your food to eat it safely and pleasantly. By scheduling the largest meal for when natural light is strongest, Colonial Americans optimized their use of this precious free resource. The meal being prepared at the hearth has been cooking for hours. Remember, you cannot simply turn on a burner and have heat immediately. Everything cooked over fire takes longer than its modern equivalent. The stew or pottage bubbling in the iron pot was started this morning. Ingredients added gradually, the flavours melding as the hours passed. The bread was baked earlier, either in a brick oven built into the chimney structure, or in a Dutch oven buried in coals. Let's talk about what's actually in that pot. Meat, if you have it. Probably salt pork or fresh-killed chicken, possibly game if someone in the household hunts successfully. Vegetables from the garden or root cellar. Onions certainly. Perhaps cabbage, carrots, turnips, whatever is in season and available. Herbs for flavouring. Grain to thicken. Barley, oatmeal or cornmeal making the liquid into something more substantial. The goal is filling, not fancy. You need calories to fuel the afternoon's labour. The table is set, or rather the eating surface is prepared, whatever form that takes in your household. Trenchers might be used, thick slices of stale bread that serve as edible plates, soaking up juices and then consumed at meal's end. Or you might have wooden plates, or pewter if your family has accumulated some wealth. Spoons are essential, forks are less common. Everyone has a knife, probably the same personal knife they use for dozens of daily tasks, wiped clean on the apron or sleeve before cutting food. Here's a quirky detail about colonial dining. The salt. Salt is expensive, as we've discussed, and its placement on the table indicates social hierarchy. At formal dinners, the salt cellar sits at a specific spot, and those seated above the salt, closer to the head of the table, are higher in status than those seated below the salt. This arrangement persists from medieval traditions, and while it matters less in informal family meals, it remains part of the cultural vocabulary around dining. The family gathers from their various morning tasks, children called in from play or chores, adults setting aside tools, everyone washing hands at the basin, perhaps not thoroughly by modern standards, but at least symbolically. Grace is said in most households, a blessing over the food that acknowledges divine providence and asks protection from illness. Then, eating begins. Table manners vary significantly by social class. Among the elite, elaborate rules govern who serves themselves first, how food should be passed, proper handling of utensils. Among common folk, manners are simpler but still present. You don't grab food from someone else's portion. You don't speak with your mouth full. You show respect to your elders. Children eat quietly, speak when spoken to, and are grateful for what they receive. The food itself is probably more flavourful than you might expect. Herbs are used generously. They're easy to grow and store, compensating for the limited variety of ingredients. The salt that preserved your meat also seasons it. Vinegar from fermented cider adds brightness. Onions and garlic contribute depth. Yes, everything is somewhat monotonous by modern standards. You're eating variations on the same themes day after day. But within those limitations, colonial cooks show genuine creativity. Drink accompanies the meal, cider, beer, possibly water if your source is trusted. Wine is expensive, reserved for the wealthy or for special occasions. The alcohol in everyday beverages is mild, intended more for safety than intoxication. Children drink the same things adults drink, diluted perhaps with water for the youngest. The pace of eating is not leisurely. There's work to be done, daylight to use, tasks waiting. You eat quickly, efficiently, fueling the body rather than lingering over courses. The elaborate multi-course dinners of European aristocracy find pale imitation among colonial elites, but don't reach common tables. You have one dish, maybe two, and you eat until you're satisfied, or until the pot is empty. Leftovers, if there are any, become tomorrow's meal or supper tonight. Nothing is wasted. The scraps go to the pigs, the bones to the dogs, the drippings saved for cooking. The trenchers are eaten or fed to animals. In an economy of scarcity, everything finds a use. Historians still argue about exactly how well nourished the average colonial American was. The evidence is mixed. Compared to European peasants, colonial Americans probably ate better. Land was abundant, meat more available, starvation less common. But compared to modern standards, diets were limited, monotonous, and often lacking in vitamins that cause problems only after months of deficiency. Scurvy, rickets, various nutritional disorders appeared regularly, especially among the poor, especially in late winter when stored food was depleted and fresh greens not yet available. You finish eating, wipe your mouth, push back from the table. The meal has taken perhaps 20 minutes. Substantial food, minimal ceremony. The dishes will be dealt with eventually, though not with the immediate scrubbing you might expect. There's too much else to do. The afternoon's work awaits, energised by the calories you've just consumed, and the sun is already beginning its long slide toward evening. Outside, the shadows have shifted. The day's second half begins now, different in character from the morning, less focused on maintenance and animal care, more on production and project work, but that's for the next part of your day. For now, you allow yourself a moment of satisfaction. Belly full, body rested, ready for whatever comes next. The men have returned to the fields, the children have scattered to their various tasks, and you, let's say you're a woman in this household, experiencing the particular rhythms of female labour in colonial America, face an afternoon that stretches ahead full of endless essential work that will never earn you recognition, compensation, or rest. Women's work in colonial America is not a subset of labour. It is not light duty. It is not supporting role. It is the foundation upon which the entire household stands, and it never, ever stops. Let's inventory what you're responsible for today alone. The cooking, obviously, preparing 3 meals over an open fire requiring constant attention, managing temperatures without thermometers, timing without clocks, achieving results that will keep your family alive and reasonably satisfied. The cleaning, such as it is, sweeping floors that accumulate dirt constantly, removing ash from the hearth, emptying chamber pots, maintaining some minimal level of hygiene in a world that provides few tools for achieving it. But these are just the obvious tasks, the ones even casual observers might notice. Beneath them lie layers upon layers of skilled work that you perform without acknowledgement. Spinning, for instance. That linen you're wearing, that wool blanket on the bed, that thread holding your husband's shirt together. All of it had to be spun from raw fibre into usable thread before it could be woven or knitted into anything. The spinning wheel in the corner of your main room is not a decorative antique. It's production equipment that you operate for hours daily. Your foot works the treadle, your hands draft the fibre, the wheel turns and slowly, thread accumulates. The phrase spinster, meaning an unmarried woman. It comes from this era, when unmarried women often supported themselves by spinning, the one skilled trade reliably open to them. Married women spin too, of course. Everyone spins, the demand for thread so insatiable that no one can keep up with it. Weaving is another skill, though not every household has a loom. Looms are large, expensive, and require dedicated space. Many families instead purchase woven cloth or trade for it. But if you do have a loom, operating it consumes days of focused labour to produce yards of fabric that will then be cut and sewn into garments, that will then wear out and need replacing, the cycle never ending. Sewing and mending fill whatever gaps remain. You're not just making new clothes, though that happens, the cutting and piecing and stitching of garments that must fit properly, protect from elements, and last as long as possible. You're also maintaining existing clothes, patching holes, replacing buttons, letting out seams as children grow, taking in seams as illness shrinks bodies. A needle and thread are always within reach. Work always waiting. Candle making is women's work in most households. Those candles that provide your only light after dark don't appear magically. They're produced through a tedious process of dipping wicks repeatedly into melted tallow, allowing each layer to cool before dipping again, building up the candle coat by coat until it's thick enough to burn properly. We'll discuss this more later, but for now understand, every candle represents hours of labour. Soap making is similarly time-consuming and women's responsibility. You collect ash from the fireplace, steep it in water to create lye, combine the lye with rendered animal fat in precisely the right proportions, boil the mixture for hours, pour it into moulds to cure. The soap that emerges is harsh by modern standards, excellent for cutting grease and removing dirt, less excellent for delicate skin, but it's what you have and you make it yourself. The kitchen garden we visited earlier is primarily your domain. The preserving of food, the salting, smoking, pickling, drying that keeps your family alive through winter, falls largely to you. Dairy work is women's work. Milking the cow, sometimes shared with children, churning butter, making cheese. Brewing beer was traditionally women's work before commercial breweries emerged. In your household, you might still be doing it yourself. Childcare happens simultaneously with everything else. The baby on your hip, the toddler underfoot, the older children whose disputes you must settle, whose injuries you must treat, whose education in household skills you must provide. All of this while cooking and spinning and cleaning and mending. There is no separation between work and childcare in colonial America. They happen together, woven into every moment of every day. Here's something that might surprise you. In the legal framework of colonial America, a married woman essentially doesn't exist. Under the doctrine of coverture, inherited from English common law, a wife's legal identity is subsumed into her husband's. She cannot own property independently, cannot sign contracts, cannot sue or be sued. Any wages she might earn belong to her husband. Any property she brought into the marriage becomes his. She has no independent legal standing whatsoever. Historians still argue about whether this legal non-existence translated into actual powerlessness within households, or whether women wielded informal authority that compensated for formal disability. The evidence suggests both were true. Women were legally subordinate but often practically essential, their knowledge and skills indispensable, their opinions weighted heavily in decisions that officially belonged to husbands alone. The physical toll of this labour is substantial. Women in colonial America age quickly. The combination of constant pregnancy, we'll discuss childbirth later, relentless physical work, inadequate medical care and nutritional deficits during pregnancy and nursing means many women are worn out by their 30s. Hands grow gnarled from spinning and scrubbing. Backs ache from bending over hearths. The beauty standards of the era, smooth skin, white hands, upright posture, are achievable only by wealthy women who can delegate physical labour to servants. And yet this work is not merely drudgery. There's skill here, genuine expertise, knowledge that takes years to acquire and proves essential to survival. A woman who can spin thread, weave cloth, sew garments, cook food, preserve meat, make soap, brew beer, tend gardens, birth babies, and manage a household is not unskilled. She's a master of multiple trades, a generalist whose breadth of competence keeps her family alive. You pick up your spinning, finding the rhythm familiar, your hands knowing what to do without conscious direction. The wheel turns, the thread forms, the afternoon passes in labour that seems invisible, but holds everything together. While you spin inside the house, the men of your family labour in the fields, in the forest, at tasks that require different skills but equal exhaustion. Let's follow them into the afternoon sun and understand what their days demand. The primary occupation of most colonial American men is farming, and farming in the 1700s is back-breaking work conducted with tools that seem primitive by modern standards. There are no tractors, no mechanical harvesters, no powered irrigation systems. There is the plough, pulled by oxen or horses if you have them, dragged by human muscle if you don't. There is the hoe, the scythe, the sickle. There is your body, bent over rows of crops, working from dawn to dusk during the growing season. The plough itself is a heavy wooden implement, its cutting edge perhaps reinforced with iron, drawn through soil that resists every inch of progress. Ploughing a single acre might take an entire day of brutal labour, guiding the stubborn oxen, wrestling the plough through roots and rocks, turning over earth that fights back. Colonial farmers plough far fewer acres than their modern counterparts, not because they're lazy, but because they physically cannot manage more. Planting follows ploughing, seeds dropped into furrows by hand, covered with soil, patted down, a prayer offered that weather and pests will cooperate. Weeding continues throughout the growing season. Remember, there are no herbicides, no mechanical cultivators. Every weed that threatens your corn or wheat must be removed by hand, by hoe, through hours spent crawling between rows in summer heat. Harvest is the crescendo of the agricultural year. Grain must be cut with scythes or sickles, gathered into sheaves, carried to the threshing floor where flails beat the kernels from the stalks. The grain then needs winnowing, tossed into the air so the breeze carries away lighter chaff while heavier grain falls back to the ground. This process, which a modern combine accomplishes in minutes, takes weeks of concentrated labour in colonial America. But farming is not the only work available to men. In forested regions, timber harvesting consumes enormous effort. Trees must be felled with axes, the crosscut saw exists, but two-person operation is difficult. Trimmed of branches, dragged or rolled to wherever they'll be used. The wood becomes building material, fence posts, fuel for fires. A single log cabin, simple as it appears, represents months of logging, hauling, shaping and construction. Craftsmen practice trades that might seem more refined but are equally demanding physically. The blacksmith works at a forge hot enough to soften iron, swinging heavy hammers for hours, shaping tools and hardware that the community needs. The carpenter shapes wood with hand tools, planes, chisels, saws operated by arm power, creating furniture, buildings, the 1,000 wooden objects that colonial life requires. The cooper makes barrels, essential containers for storing and shipping everything from flour to whiskey. The miller grinds grain into flour, managing water wheels or wind power, maintaining machinery that breaks constantly. In port cities and trading centres, men engage in commerce, loading and unloading ships, keeping accounts, negotiating trades. But even commercial work involves substantial physical labour. Warehouses have no forklifts, cargo moves by human muscle, ships are loaded one barrel, one crate, one sack at a time. Here's a detail that illuminates the physical reality of men's labour. The average colonial American man was about 5 feet 7 inches tall, significantly shorter than modern Americans. Nutrition, disease during childhood, and the physical demands placed on growing bodies all contributed to this stunting. But within those smaller frames were muscles developed through constant use, not the sculpted muscles of modern gym-goers, but the functional strength of bodies that work hard every day. The workday has no fixed hours in the modern sense. You work when there's light and work to be done. In summer, this might mean 16-hour days in the fields during harvest. In winter, shorter days and indoor tasks provide something like rest, though there's always maintenance, repair, and preparation keeping hands busy. The concept of a 40-hour work week, of weekends, of vacation time, these are fantasies that will take centuries to achieve. Sundays provide mandatory rest in most colonies, enforced by both religious conviction and civil law. The Sabbath is for church attendance, for spiritual reflection, for recovery. Working on Sunday can bring legal penalties, social censure, and the disapproval of neighbours whose good opinion you need. This weekly pause is welcome, even if you spend it sitting on a hard pew listening to sermons that might stretch for hours. Historians still argue about exactly how productive colonial farmers were compared to their European counterparts. Some evidence suggests American farmers were more efficient. Land was cheap and plentiful, encouraging extensive rather than intensive cultivation. Other evidence suggests they were sloppier, wearing out soil through poor practices, moving on to new land rather than nurturing what they had. The truth probably varies by region, by individual, by circumstance. What's not in dispute is the toll this labour takes. Men in colonial America are old by 50, their bodies worn out by decades of physical punishment. Hernias from lifting, broken bones from accidents with animals or falling trees, fingers lost to axes and saws, backs that never fully straighten after years bent over crops. The robust farmer of nostalgic imagination is often a limping, aching, prematurely aged man just trying to make it through another season. The afternoon wears on, the sun tracking westward, shadows lengthening across the fields. The men work until the light fails, then trudge home to rest briefly before evening chores begin. Their labour, like the women's labour happening simultaneously at home, is relentless, essential, and rarely acknowledged as anything extraordinary. It's simply what must be done, every day, to survive. The afternoon shadows grow longer, and somewhere in the household someone is calculating how many hours of darkness lie ahead, how much light remains. These calculations matter because artificial light in colonial America is precious, difficult to produce, and never adequate. The economy of light shapes your days as powerfully as any other factor. Candles are the primary source of light after dark, and candles are shockingly expensive, either in money if you buy them, or in labour if you make them yourself. The tallow candles most common in colonial households are produced from rendered animal fat, a process that stinks, takes hours, and yields candles that smoke, sputter, smell unpleasant while burning, and provide relatively dim light. A single tallow candle produces about 1 foot candle of illumination, roughly equivalent to standing 12 feet from a 60-watt bulb. Modern standards consider this marginal for reading. Your eyes must strain constantly to make use of it. Beeswax candles burn cleaner and brighter, but beeswax is even more expensive than tallow. Keeping bees requires knowledge, equipment, and luck. Purchasing beeswax requires money most families don't have. Beeswax candles are luxury items, reserved for wealthy households, for churches, for special occasions. You probably smell them only when you visit someone significantly richer than yourself. The making of tallow candles is tedious labour. First you need tallow, animal fat rendered over fire, the impurities strained out, the resulting substance cooled into blocks that can be stored until needed. This rendering is unpleasant work, involving odours that permeate everything, grease that spatters and burns, hours of watching and stirring. When candle-making day arrives, you set up your dipping station, a tall vessel of melted tallow kept at the right temperature over your fire, and several lengths of cotton wick cut to appropriate length. You dip the wicks into the tallow, lift them out, allow the thin coat to cool, then dip again, and again, and again. Each dip adds a tiny layer. A usable candle requires dozens of dips over the course of hours. You might produce a few dozen candles in a day's work, which sounds like a lot until you realise how quickly they burn. A single candle might provide 4 to 6 hours of light before guttering out. A family that lights just one candle per evening, and most families try to limit it to one to conserve resources, goes through roughly 30 candles per month, 360 candles per year. If you're making all those candles yourself, you're spending many days annually just on candle production. If you're buying them, you're spending money that might otherwise feed your family. Here's a frugal solution many families employ: the rushlight. This poor person's candle uses the pith from rushes, those tall grass-like plants growing in wet areas, dried and then dipped once or twice in grease. The resulting light source is dimmer than a proper candle and burns out faster, but it's cheap and quick to produce. Rushlights are common in poorer households, where even tallow candles represent an unaffordable expense. Another option, the Betty lamp or grease lamp. This simple metal container holds a wick that draws fuel from a reservoir of fat or oil. It produces a smoky, smelly flame, not particularly bright, but persistent and cheap to operate if you have fat to spare. Various designs exist, some hanging from hooks, others sitting on tables, all accomplishing the basic task of converting fuel into light. The consequences of this light scarcity shape daily life in ways difficult for modern minds to grasp. Work that requires seeing must happen during daylight, which is why you rise before dawn and work until dusk. Evening activities are limited to those that can be accomplished in dimness: conversation, storytelling, perhaps simple handwork like knitting that your fingers can manage without visual guidance. Reading is difficult, reserved for those with good eyes and important texts. Casual reading for pleasure is essentially unknown among common people. The fireplace provides supplemental light, of course, but remember, firelight is even more localized than candlelight. You must sit very close to see anything by the fire's glow, and that prime seating is often occupied by someone cooking or tending the flames. The competition for spots near the light source is constant, unconscious, shaping where people sit and what they do. Historians still argue about how this light poverty affected literacy, productivity and culture in colonial America. Some suggest limited light contributed to limited reading, which contributed to limited education, which perpetuated certain social structures. Others argue that people adapted, that oral culture thrived in the darkness, that community and family bonds strengthened when everyone clustered together around the single precious flame. Both arguments hold merit. What's certain is that you think about light differently than your modern counterparts. You hoard it, you time activities around it, you resent its scarcity even while accepting it as unavoidable. The casual flicking of switches, the rooms blazing with electric illumination, the assumption that darkness can always be banished. These are luxuries you cannot imagine, and if described to you, might seem like magic or madness. The sun sinks lower, you light the evening's candle, that small flame that must serve the entire household for the remaining hours of wakefulness. Its glow seems simultaneously precious and pathetically inadequate. You draw closer, along with everyone else, and the family enters that intimate circle of light that defines colonial evenings. Beyond the circle of candlelight, beyond the boundaries of your farm, lies a world you know only partially, a world where news travels slowly, where information is scarce, and where communication with distant places requires extraordinary effort and patience. In colonial America there is no internet, no television, no radio, no telephone. The technologies that collapse distance in the modern world don't exist. If you want to communicate with someone beyond shouting range, your options are limited to physical travel, yours or theirs, or the postal system, which is neither reliable nor fast. Letters are the primary method of long-distance communication, and sending a letter is not a casual act. Paper is expensive, ink must be made or purchased, and postage costs money that most people don't have to spare. You don't dash off quick notes. You write carefully, including everything important because the letter might take weeks to arrive and the reply weeks more to return. A simple exchange of information with family in another colony might consume months. The postal system itself is rudimentary by modern standards. Mail travels by horse, by ship, by whatever conveyance is heading in the right direction. There are no guaranteed delivery times, no tracking numbers, no way to know if your letter arrived until a response comes back or doesn't. Letters get lost, get damaged, get delayed indefinitely. Writing to someone far away is always an act of hope as much as communication. Newspapers exist in colonial America, but they're luxury items, published in major cities, distributed slowly, containing news that's already old by the time you read it. The first continuously published newspaper in the colonies, the Boston Newsletter, appeared in 1704, and others followed in major urban centres. But subscription costs money, literacy is required for reading, and delivery to rural areas is spotty at best. Most colonial Americans never see a newspaper. What you know about the world beyond your immediate community comes primarily through word of mouth. The traveller passing through who shares stories of where he's been, the merchant who brings goods and gossip from distant ports, the minister who reads letters from church headquarters describing events in other regions, the occasional broadside, a single printed sheet posted in public places announcing major events. This reliance on oral transmission has consequences. Information gets distorted as it passes from person to person. Rumours spread unchecked, morphing with each telling. What actually happened in Boston or Philadelphia or London bears uncertain relationship to what you eventually hear months later. You learn to be sceptical, to wait for confirmation, to assume that any dramatic story is probably exaggerated. Here's a quirky detail about colonial communication: the franc. Members of the colonial legislature and other officials had the privilege of sending mail for free. They simply signed the envelope in lieu of paying postage, and this signature was called a franc. This privilege was valuable enough that some officials abused it, sending personal correspondence under the guise of official business. The ordinary citizen, lacking this privilege, paid for every letter sent and received. The church serves as a communication hub in many communities. Announcements from the pulpit reach everyone who attends, which is most people, church attendance being socially expected and sometimes legally required. Births, deaths, marriages, community meetings, political developments, all might be announced by the minister on Sunday morning. If you want everyone to know something, you tell the minister. Taverns serve a similar function in a less formal way. They're gathering places where news is exchanged along with drink, where travellers share stories with locals, where the scattered pieces of information about the wider world assemble into something like a picture. Men frequent taverns after work, and the conversations there shape community opinion and spread awareness of events near and far. The isolation this creates is difficult for modern minds to fully grasp. You might never travel more than 20 miles from your birthplace. You might never meet anyone from outside your colony. Your understanding of the wider world is fragmentary, filtered, always incomplete. Events of global significance, wars, discoveries, political transformations, reach you as distant echoes, their immediate relevance to your daily life often unclear. Historians still argue about whether this information scarcity made colonial Americans more or less politically engaged. Some suggest that the difficulty of obtaining information made people value it more highly, discussing and debating whatever news arrived with intense focus. Others argue that isolation bred indifference, that people cared only about local matters because those were the only matters they could actually know about. What's certain is that your sense of community is intensely local. The people you see regularly, neighbours, fellow church members, trading partners, these are your world. Abstract loyalties to colony or crown exist, certainly, but they're less visceral than the bonds connecting you to people you actually know. Your identity is rooted in place, in the small piece of earth you inhabit, in relationships built through daily interaction. The mail might come today, bringing a letter from distant relatives, or it might not come for weeks. You cannot know, cannot control, cannot do anything but wait and hope and focus on the immediate task before you. The evening chores are complete, animals fed again, fire tended, children settled, and now the family gathers for one of the most important rituals of colonial life, one that structures not just your Sunday mornings, but your entire week, your moral framework, your place in the community, religion. In colonial America, faith is not a private matter. It's not something you choose to engage with or not, displayed or hidden according to personal preference. Religion is public, mandatory in many colonies, and pervasive in ways that shape every aspect of daily existence. Church attendance on Sunday is expected, and in many colonies required by law. Fines for missing services are real, collected by church wardens who keep careful track of who's present and who's not. Beyond the legal requirements, social pressure is intense. Your standing in the community depends partly on your visible piety, on your regular presence in the pew, on your participation in the rituals that mark you as a member in good standing. The Sunday service is long by modern standards, multiple hours of sermons, prayers, psalm singing, scripture reading. The meeting house, or church where you gather, is often cold in winter, hot in summer, furnished with hard benches that offer no comfort. You sit through all of it, including sermons that might run 2 hours or more, detailed theological expositions delivered in language that requires concentration to follow. The seating arrangement in church reflects social hierarchy. Wealthier and more prominent families sit closer to the front, in pews they might actually own. Pew rental is a common practice, providing both revenue for the church and visible markers of status. Poorer families sit toward the back, or stand, or crowd into galleries. The arrangement announces to everyone exactly where each family ranks in the community's estimation. What you believe depends heavily on where you live. In New England, congregational churches descended from the Puritan founders dominate. In the middle colonies, diversity flourishes. Quakers in Pennsylvania, Dutch Reformed in New York, various German sects scattered throughout. In the southern colonies, the Anglican Church holds official status, though actual church attendance is sometimes sparse in rural areas, where churches are few and far between. Here's something that might surprise you. The Great Awakening is transforming colonial religion during the mid-1700s, bringing emotional, experiential faith to challenge the cooler, more intellectual religion of established churches. Itinerant preachers travel from town to town, delivering passionate sermons that move listeners to tears, to trembling, to public conversion experiences. This revival movement divides communities between old lights, who favour traditional worship, and new lights, who embrace the emotional approach. Historians still argue about whether the Great Awakening strengthened or weakened traditional religious authority, whether it democratised faith or simply shifted power from one set of elites to another. Religion shapes your daily life in countless ways beyond Sunday services. You say grace before meals. You observe daily family devotions in many households, reading scripture, praying together, singing hymns. You regulate your behaviour according to religious law. No work on Sunday, no blasphemy, no visible drunkenness or sexual immorality. The Church disciplines members who violate these standards, potentially excommunicating the unrepentant and excluding them from community life. The minister is one of the most important figures in your community. He's educated, often the only university-educated person for miles, and serves as counsellor, teacher, and moral authority. He visits the sick, comforts the bereaved, solemnizes marriages, and pronounces the final words over the dead. His opinions carry weight in political matters, his sermons shaping how the community understands events and issues. But ministers are also human, and not all of them serve their flocks well. Some are lazy, delivering the same sermons repeatedly. Some are drunk, notorious in their communities for tippling. Some are cruel, using their authority to settle personal grudges. The system has no effective oversight beyond congregational displeasure, and removing an unsuitable minister is difficult. The theological content of colonial religion emphasizes certain themes that might feel foreign to modern ears. Original sin, the idea that all humans are born corrupted by Adam's fall, is a central doctrine. Predestination, in Calvinist traditions, teaches that God has already determined who will be saved and who damned, and nothing you do can change your fate. Hell is vividly real, described in sermons with graphic detail, its torments awaiting those who die unrepentant. These beliefs create genuine anxiety. Knowing your eternal fate is uncertain, you search your soul constantly for signs of grace. And yet religion also provides comfort, community, and meaning. The weekly gathering brings people together, creating bonds that extend beyond spiritual matters into mutual aid and social connection. The assurance that God watches over all, that suffering serves some divine purpose, helps people endure hardships that might otherwise be unbearable. The rhythm of the church calendar, fast days, Thanksgiving days, days of humiliation and repentance, gives shape to the year, marking time in ways that matter. Tonight, as darkness falls and the family gathers in the candlelight, someone reads from the Bible, The words are familiar, heard since childhood, their rhythms and images woven into your understanding of the world. You believe them, more or less, with a certainty that modern skepticism would find difficult. This is not merely tradition. This is truth as you understand it, the framework within which everything else makes sense. A cough breaks the evening quiet, then another, deeper, rattling. Someone in the household is sick, and this simple fact introduces a realm of terror and uncertainty that shadows all of colonial existence. Medicine, or rather, its near-complete absence. When illness strikes in colonial America, you have remarkably few options. There are no antibiotics to fight infection, no vaccines to prevent disease, no anesthesia to ease painful treatments. The germ theory of disease lies more than a century in the future. You have no idea what actually causes sickness, attributing it variously to bad air, divine punishment, imbalanced humours, or simple bad luck. Your first line of defence is the household store of folk remedies, those herbal preparations passed down through generations of women who served as their family's primary healers. The fever few that reduces fever, the chamomile that calms upset stomachs, the willow bark containing the compound that will eventually become aspirin that eases pain. These remedies are not nothing. Some of them work, their effectiveness discovered through centuries of trial and error. But they're limited, applicable to mild conditions, useless against the serious diseases that kill most frequently. What kills people in colonial America? Where to begin? Smallpox sweeps through communities periodically, killing roughly 30% of those who contract it, and leaving survivors scarred and sometimes blinded. Measles, diphtheria, whooping cough, diseases we now prevent with childhood vaccines, carry away children with grim regularity. Typhoid fever spreads through contaminated water, which is most water. Dysentery, called the bloody flux, produces violent diarrhea that dehydrates victims to death. Malaria haunts the southern colonies, its cyclical fevers weakening victims over years. Tuberculosis, the white plague or consumption, wastes its victims slowly, their coughing spreading the disease to family members who nurse them. If your folk remedies fail, you might summon a physician, assuming one exists within travelling distance, which in rural areas is not guaranteed. The physicians of colonial America are not the trained specialists of the modern era. Many have no formal medical education at all. They've learned their trade through apprenticeship, through reading whatever medical text they could acquire, through trial and error on their patients. The medical theories they follow are often worse than useless. Bloodletting is standard practice, based on the ancient belief that illness results from imbalanced bodily humours that can be restored to equilibrium by draining blood. Patients already weakened by disease are weakened further by deliberate blood loss, sometimes multiple sessions, sometimes enough blood to cause shock. George Washington will eventually be killed partly by excessive bloodletting during his final illness, but that's the future. For now, the practice continues unchallenged. Purging is another common treatment, inducing vomiting or diarrhea through powerful drugs to expel whatever poisons or imbalances supposedly cause illness. Patients racked by disease are given substances that make them vomit repeatedly, that send them rushing to the chamber pot, that drain fluids from bodies already desperately needing hydration. Many treatments are worse than the diseases they supposedly cure. Here's a genuinely terrifying detail. Mercury is a common medicine. Calomel, mercurous chloride, is prescribed for dozens of conditions, from syphilis to constipation. Mercury is toxic, of course, causing symptoms we now recognise as mercury poisoning: loosened teeth, excessive salivation, tremors, kidney damage. But colonial physicians interpret these symptoms as signs that the treatment is working, that the body is expelling its poisons. Patients receive more mercury, become sicker, and sometimes die from the treatment itself. Surgery exists but is nightmarish. Without anaesthesia, patients must be held down while surgeons cut, saw, and probe. Speed is essential. The faster the surgery, the less time the patient spends in agony, and the best surgeons are valued for their quickness rather than their precision. Infections following surgery are common, often fatal. Limb amputations, the most frequent major surgery, leave roughly 1 in 3 patients dead from complications. Childbirth, which we'll discuss more later, is medically dangerous, killing a significant percentage of women despite being an entirely natural process. Doctors, when they attend births at all, often make things worse with interventions that introduce infection, or cause physical damage. Historians still argue about whether colonial Americans would have been better off with no medical treatment at all, simply letting diseases run their course while providing comfort care. The evidence is mixed, but for many conditions the answer is probably yes. The treatments were harmful, the doctors dangerous, and doing nothing would have produced better outcomes. And yet people seek treatment, hope for cures, believe in their physicians' abilities. The alternative, accepting that you're helpless against disease, that your family members will die and you can do nothing, is psychologically unbearable. Even ineffective treatment provides the comfort of action, of trying, of not simply surrendering. Tonight the cough continues. You prepare a tea from horehound, known to soothe respiratory symptoms. You pray, because prayer is as legitimate a remedy as any other you possess. You watch and wait and hope that whatever this illness is, it passes without claiming a life. The seasons turn as they always do, and your body feels every shift in ways that modern climate-controlled existence can barely imagine. Let's talk about what it means to live without heating and cooling systems, to experience summer's brutal heat and winter's deadly cold with nothing but architecture and clothing, and sheer endurance as your defences. Summer arrives first in our consideration, bringing heat that builds in your wooden house like water filling a basin. The small windows, designed to minimise heat loss in winter, now trap warmth inside. The hearth, where you must still cook, radiates additional heat into rooms already sweltering. The sun pounds on the roof, which has minimal insulation, turning the space beneath into something approaching an oven. You cope through strategies that seem primitive but work reasonably well. You rise earlier in summer, accomplishing work in the cooler morning hours, resting during the midday heat. You move activities outdoors when possible. Some cooking might happen in an outdoor kitchen or fire pit, reducing heat inside the house. You wear lighter clothing, though lighter is relative. Even summer garments involve more layers than modern people would tolerate. Windows are thrown open to catch any breeze. Doors stand ajar. The house becomes semi-permeable, air flowing through in ways impossible during winter. At night, you might drag sleeping pallets outdoors, sleeping under the stars where the air moves more freely than inside. This exposes you to mosquitoes, which are not merely annoying, but carriers of malaria and other diseases. A trade-off you accept because the alternative is suffocating in an airless box. Work slows during the hottest days. There's a rhythm to agricultural labour that accounts for summer heat. Early morning planting and harvesting, midday rest, evening tasks when shadows lengthen. Fighting this rhythm courts heat stroke, which colonial people recognised even without understanding its physiology. You learn to read your body's signals, to stop before you collapse. The food you eat shifts with the season. Summer brings fresh vegetables and fruits, a welcome relief from the preserved foods of winter, but keeping anything requires immediate consumption or preservation. Meat spoils within hours in summer heat. Milk sours almost before you can carry it from cow to house. The frantic preserving work of autumn is partly driven by summer's perishability. You must process the abundance quickly before it rots. Then comes winter, and winter in colonial America is an entirely different kind of challenge. The cold is absolute in ways modern Americans rarely experience. Your house, remember, is heated by a single fireplace whose warmth extends perhaps 15 feet in any direction. Beyond that radius, the house is essentially outdoor temperature with walls. You can see your breath in your bedroom. Water left in a basin overnight freezes solid. You survive winter through layers. Layers of clothing, layers of blankets, layers of household management that conserve every possible bit of heat. The fire burns constantly, fed through the night, someone waking periodically to add wood lest the embers die. Everyone sleeps in the same room, sharing body heat, animals sometimes brought inside to contribute their warmth. The bed, piled with wool blankets, becomes a refuge. Leaving it each morning requires genuine willpower. Here's something the modern mind might not consider. Winter cold affects everything, not just comfort. Your water supply might freeze, requiring you to break ice or melt snow. Your food stores in the root cellar might freeze if temperatures drop too far. Frozen potatoes are ruined, their cells burst by ice crystals. The animals must be kept from freezing too, which means shelter, which means more structures to build and maintain. Travel becomes dangerous or impossible. Snow blocks roads that were marginal to begin with. Streams freeze solid, potentially offering ice bridges but also potentially breaking under weight. Getting lost in a snowstorm means death. The cold kills quickly. and there's no rescue service coming to find you. Historians still argue about whether colonial Americans experienced harsher winters than we do today, whether the Little Ice Age affecting the Northern Hemisphere during this period made conditions significantly worse than modern climate would suggest. The evidence indicates temperatures were indeed somewhat colder, but the real difference was vulnerability. Without heating systems, without insulated construction, without the ability to simply turn up a thermostat, even moderate cold became life-threatening. Spring and autumn bring their own challenges. The mud season when roads become impassable, the flooding as snow melts, the frosts that can destroy crops planted too early or left unharvested too late. You become exquisitely attuned to weather, watching the sky constantly, reading signs that modern people have forgotten how to see. Your survival depends on correctly anticipating what the atmosphere will do next. Tonight, whatever season it is, you adapt. You're always adapting. The weather does what it will, and you respond with whatever tools your era provides. The fire burns low, the candle gutters, and yet the family lingers, unwilling quite yet to surrender to the darkness and seek their beds. This is the hour for entertainment, such as it is in a world without screens, without recorded music, without any of the passive amusements that fill modern evenings. What do you do for fun in colonial America? You make your own. Storytelling fills many evening hours. Someone with a gift for narrative holds the family's attention, spinning tales that might be true, might be embellished, might be entirely fictional. Ghost stories are popular, tales of hauntings, of encounters with the supernatural, passed down through generations and genuinely believed by many listeners. Stories from the Bible, reinterpreted and expanded, the familiar characters brought to vivid life, stories of local events, of scandals and triumphs and tragedies that befell people everyone knows. Music requires no electricity and singing is universal. You sing hymns learned at church, their familiar harmonies are comfort in the darkness. You sing folk songs brought from the old country, England, Scotland, Ireland, Germany, wherever your ancestors originated. Songs of love and loss, of work and war, of home. If someone in the household plays an instrument, a fiddle, a flute, perhaps a simple drum, the songs gain accompaniment. Dancing might follow on special occasions, the furniture pushed aside, the room transformed into a dance floor where reels and jigs bring warmth to cold winter evenings. Games occupy both children and adults. Card games, when cards are available, though Puritan communities frown on gambling and sometimes on cards entirely. Board games of various sorts, some improvised from available materials. Dice games, despite their association with vice. Physical games, tag, hide and seek, blind man's bluff, that work indoors when space allows or outdoors in warmer seasons. Here's a detail that might surprise you. Puzzles are popular. Riddles pose mental challenges that occupy minds during idle moments. Word games test vocabulary and wit. Mathematical puzzles circulate among those with numerical inclinations. The absence of passive entertainment means people develop skills in entertaining themselves and each other. Reading happens in literate households, though the dim light limits how much. The Bible is the most common book, its stories so familiar that even non-readers know them. Almanacs provide useful information, planting dates, tide tables, astronomical predictions, alongside entertainment sections containing puzzles, jokes and serialized stories. Chapbooks, small cheaply printed pamphlets, offer adventure stories, romantic tales, and sensational accounts of crimes and disasters. The tavern provides entertainment outside the home, at least for men. Here you find company, conversation, news and drink. Always drink. The social lubricant of colonial America. Taverns host games, sometimes organise competitions. They're where young men prove themselves, where old men hold forth on topics of interest, where travellers share stories and locals listen eagerly. The tavern is entertainment venue, news source, and community centre rolled into one. Special occasions bring the community together for collective entertainment. Weddings involve feasting, dancing, and celebration that might last for days. Militia training days combine military obligation with socialising, the drilling followed by contests and carousing. Harvest festivals celebrate abundance with food, drink, and merriment. Election days, in colonies where voting occurs, are public events with the atmosphere of a fair. Historians still argue about whether colonial Americans worked harder or played harder than modern people. The evidence is mixed. They certainly worked more hours in absolute terms, but their entertainment was more social, more active, more participatory than the passive consumption that dominates modern leisure. They didn't watch entertainment, they created it together in ways that strengthened community bonds. The fire has burned very low now. The candle offers barely enough light to see faces. The stories are winding down, the songs fading into comfortable silence. One by one, family members begin drifting toward bed, the entertainment of the evening giving way to the rest that tomorrow's labour demands. But before sleep comes, there are final rituals to observe. The house must be secured, the fire banked, the preparations for night completed. These tasks, performed every evening with variations for season and circumstance, mark the transition from waking to sleeping, from activity to rest. You've had your fun, modest by modern standards, rich by any measure that counts human connection. Now the day truly ends. Love exists in colonial America. Let's be clear about that from the start. People fall in love, feel passion, yearn for each other across crowded rooms. The emotion is as old as humanity, unchanged by circumstances. But the institution of marriage, the process of courtship, the entire framework within which romantic relationships unfold, these look remarkably different from their modern equivalents. Marriage in colonial America is fundamentally an economic arrangement. It's a merger of households, a combining of resources, a practical decision with consequences extending far beyond the feelings of the two people most directly involved. This doesn't mean love is irrelevant. Most people hope for affection in their marriages, and many find it. But love alone is insufficient justification for such a significant decision. Courtship begins with parental approval, or at least parental awareness. A young man interested in a young woman approaches her father first, establishing his credentials, demonstrating his ability to support a wife. The father evaluates the suitor's prospects. Does he have land, a trade, good character, standing in the community? Only if these questions have satisfactory answers does courtship proper begin. The courting couple spends time together, but rarely alone. Chaperones, whether parents, siblings, or other relatives, ensure propriety. Conversations happen within earshot of others. Physical contact is minimal and public. Perhaps holding hands, perhaps a chaperoned walk. The elaborate privacy that modern dating assumes simply doesn't exist. Here's a practice that might startle you: bundling. In some regions, courting couples are allowed to share a bed overnight, fully clothed, sometimes with a board down the middle, sometimes with the young woman sewn into a sack from the waist down. The theory is that this allows couples to talk and become acquainted during the long winter evenings, when travel is difficult and heating is expensive. The practice is controversial. Ministers preach against it, moralists condemn it, but it persists in certain communities. Historians still argue about how often bundling led to premarital pregnancy, and whether it was a reasonable adaptation to circumstances or a dangerous laxity of morals. Betrothals, once agreed upon, are nearly as binding as marriage itself. Breaking an engagement is a serious matter with potential legal consequences. Breach of promise suits allow jilted parties to sue for damages, and damages can be substantial. You don't get engaged casually. Once committed, you're expected to follow through. The marriage itself might be a civil ceremony, a religious ceremony, or something in between, depending on your colony and denomination. In Puritan New England, marriage is a civil contract, performed by magistrates rather than ministers, though religious elements are certainly present. In Anglican colonies, church weddings are standard. The ceremony joins two people legally, creates a new household, and begins the economic partnership that marriage represents. What does the bride bring to this partnership? Her dowry, property, money, household goods provided by her family. What she brings affects what kind of match she can make. Wealthier brides attract wealthier grooms. The groom brings his earning potential, his property, his prospects. The negotiation is frank, monetary, conducted between families as much as between the couple themselves. Once married, a woman's legal identity largely disappears, as we discussed earlier. Her property becomes her husband's. Her labour belongs to him. She cannot sign contracts, sue, or be sued in her own name. She's expected to obey her husband, to bear his children, to manage his household. The wedding vows that promise obedience are not mere formality. They reflect legal and social reality. And yet marriages often involve genuine partnership. In the practical work of running a household, husband and wife cooperate closely, their labour complementary, their skills essential to each other. Many men value their wives' opinions, defer to their judgment on household matters, treat them as partners rather than subordinates despite the legal framework suggesting otherwise. The reality of colonial marriages is more varied and nuanced than the formal structure might suggest. Widowhood brings a strange kind of freedom. A widow regains her legal identity, can own property, can conduct business. Some widows remarry quickly, needing a man's labour or simply preferring married life. Others remain single, enjoying autonomy they've never known before, running businesses, managing property, operating as independent agents in ways married women cannot. Love grows in these marriages, often. Years of shared labour, shared children, shared hardships create bonds that feel like love, even if they didn't start that way. And sometimes, yes, there's passion from the start. The racing heart, the stolen glances, the overwhelming desire to be near another person. Colonial Americans are not emotionless. They simply channel their emotions through different institutions than modern people do. The baby's cry in the night carries a different weight in colonial America than it might in the modern world. That cry might be hunger, might be discomfort, might be nothing at all. Or it might be the beginning of the end, the first signal of an illness that will carry this small life away within days. Death in colonial America is not a distant abstraction. It's a constant companion, present in every household, familiar to every person, shaping daily existence in ways that modern minds struggle to comprehend. Let's start with the numbers, though numbers alone can't capture the reality. Roughly 1 in 4 children born in colonial America dies before reaching adulthood. In some regions, at some times, the ratio is worse, perhaps 1 in 3, perhaps higher. If you're a mother with 6 children, you can reasonably expect to bury at least one of them. Most people bury siblings, many bury multiple children. The experience of child death is not exceptional. It's normal, expected, woven into the fabric of family life. But expected doesn't mean easy. Parents grieve their children with intensity that survives in letters and diaries, their anguish as raw and recognisable as any modern parents. The frequency of death doesn't diminish its impact. It simply means you experience that impact repeatedly, accumulating losses over a lifetime. What kills children? The diseases we discussed earlier, smallpox, measles, whooping cough, diphtheria, sweep through communities, taking children first because their immune systems are weakest. Dysentery and typhoid spread through contaminated water, dehydrating small bodies faster than adult ones. Accidents claim their share. Drownings, falls, burns from the ever-present fire, trampling by livestock. Infancy is the most dangerous period. Many children don't survive their first year, lost to diseases that adults weather, or to birth defects that modern medicine would catch and treat. Adult mortality is higher too, though not as dramatic. Men die from farm accidents, from injuries sustained in work, from diseases contracted in crowded towns, or from soldiers during the colonial wars. Women die in childbirth with depressing regularity. Perhaps 1 in 8 women dies in childbirth at some point during her reproductive years, which stretch across many pregnancies. A woman who bears 8 children, as many do, faces those odds 8 times. Childbirth itself is women's business, attended by midwives and female relatives, with male doctors called only in emergencies, and their interventions often make things worse. The lying-in room where birth occurs is closed to men, a female space where experienced women guide the labouring mother through an ordeal that remains genuinely dangerous, despite being entirely natural. Complications that modern obstetrics would handle routinely, breech presentations, prolonged labour, hemorrhage, kill women who might otherwise have lived long lives. Here's how death is handled in colonial America. It's a family affair, intimate and domestic in ways modern death rarely is. When someone dies, family members wash the body, dress it in burial clothes, and lay it out in the home for neighbours to visit and pay respects. The wake, that period of watching over the body, happens in the parlour, the same room where daily life occurs. Death is not hidden away in hospitals and funeral homes. It's present, visible, part of the household's reality. Burial follows quickly, usually within a day or 2. Without embalming, bodies decompose rapidly, especially in warm weather. The coffin, if there is one, some poorer families simply wrap bodies in shrouds, is made locally, often by the family itself or by a neighbour who does such work. The grave is dug in the church cemetery or on family land. The body lowered by hand, prayers offered, earth shoveled by people who knew the deceased personally. Mourning rituals vary by community and social class. Wealthier families might wear black for extended periods, might commission mourning jewellery containing hair from the deceased, might observe elaborate protocols of gradually lightening dress as time passes. Poorer families mourn more briefly, not from lack of feeling but from lack of resources. There's work to be done, and the living must be fed. Historians still argue about whether the frequency of death in colonial America produced emotional distance, a protective numbness that allowed people to function despite constant loss. The evidence suggests not, or at least not entirely. People grieve intensely, form attachments knowing loss is likely, love despite the near certainty of eventual separation. What's different is not the emotion, but the expectation. You know death is coming. You prepare yourself as best you can, and when it arrives, you mourn, you bury, you continue. Tonight the baby sleeps peacefully. Tomorrow might bring different news. You've learned to hold both possibilities simultaneously. The joy of a living child, the knowledge that tomorrow is never guaranteed. The daylight fades now, the evening meal is finished, and the household begins its transition from activity to rest. But before anyone can seek their bed, there's work to be done. The evening routine of securing the home, preparing for the vulnerable night hours when darkness makes everything more difficult, and dangers, both real and imagined, lurk just beyond your walls. The fire must be attended to first. You cannot let it die completely. Remember the difficulty of starting fires from scratch, but you also cannot leave it burning strongly while everyone sleeps. The solution is banking, using the poker to push the burning logs together, covering them with ash to reduce airflow and slow combustion. Done correctly, banking preserves coals that will still be alive in the morning, ready to be coaxed back into flame. Done incorrectly, the fire either dies completely or burns through its fuel too quickly, leaving you cold before dawn. The animals need final attention. Chickens should be in their coop, door secured against predators who hunt at night. Foxes, raccoons, weasels, all perfectly capable of slaughtering an entire flock if given access. Larger livestock need to be in their enclosures, gates checked, water available. The dog might be brought inside or might remain outdoors as a living alarm system, its barking warning of approaching strangers. In frontier areas, the threat of predators is constant. Wolves still roam colonial America, and they'll take livestock or rarely threaten humans. The house itself needs securing. Doors are barred, shutters closed over windows, any openings that might admit intruders, human or animal, are blocked. Crime is not unknown in colonial America. Theft happens, especially in harder times when desperation drives people to risky behaviour. The isolation of rural homesteads makes them vulnerable. A locked door and a loaded firearm nearby provide some peace of mind. Here's something the modern mind might not consider. There's no street lighting in colonial America. When darkness falls, it falls completely. The moon and stars provide some illumination on clear nights, but on overcast nights you cannot see your hand in front of your face outside. This darkness is absolute in ways we've forgotten, and it changes behaviour profoundly. You don't go out at night unless absolutely necessary. Travel after dark is dangerous. You could fall, could become lost, could encounter predators or criminals who use darkness as cover. The roads, such as they are barely navigable in daylight. At night they're treacherous. Even walking from house to barn requires care, familiarity with the path, possibly a lantern consuming precious fuel. This is when the chamber pot earns its keep. Rather than stumbling outside to the outhouse in complete darkness, you use the ceramic vessel kept under your bed. This is not luxury, this is practicality. The morning's task of emptying it is unpleasant, but less unpleasant than breaking an ankle on a midnight trip to the outhouse. Children are settled into their beds, which might be trundle beds that pull out from under adult beds, might be simple pallets on the floor, might be beds shared with siblings in the same room or a separate sleeping space. Prayers are said. Bedtime prayers are almost universal, asking divine protection through the vulnerable night hours. Stories might be told to the youngest, soothing narratives that help small minds transition from waking to sleeping. The final candle is extinguished. You blow it out carefully, watching the ember at the wick fade, knowing that this small flame represented a non-trivial resource now consumed. For the next 8 or 10 hours, the only light in your house will come from the banked fire's dim glow, and whatever moonlight filters through the cracks. You settle into bed, arranging the covers, finding the familiar contours of a mattress you've slept on for years, the sounds of the night surround you, the settling of the house, the distant calls of nocturnal animals, the breathing of family members nearby. The darkness is complete but not frightening. You've known this darkness your entire life. It's simply how nights are. But sleep in colonial America doesn't work quite the way modern sleep does, as we'll explore in more detail. For now, understand that you're entering a period of vulnerability, of rest, of regeneration that must happen regardless of what the world throws at you. Tomorrow will bring new demands. Tonight offers the only opportunity to recover from today. You fall asleep and then you wake again. Not in the morning, it's the middle of the night, the deep darkness between midnight and dawn. And yet you're awake, alert, not groggy from interrupted sleep but almost refreshed. This is normal. This is how sleep works in colonial America, and it's profoundly different from the consolidated 8-hour block that modern sleep science recommends. Historians have uncovered evidence that pre-industrial people commonly experienced what's called biphasic or segmented sleep. You sleep for several hours, wake for 1 to 2 hours in the middle of the night, then sleep again until morning. This pattern appears so consistently in historical records, diaries, court documents, medical texts, that researchers now believe it was the norm before artificial lighting made staying up late feasible. What do you do during this midnight waking? The sources describe various activities. Prayer is common. Many religious texts recommend using this quiet hour for spiritual reflection. Conversation happens between bedfellows, the darkness providing a kind of intimacy that daylight lacks. Sexual activity frequently occurs during this interval. Historians note that conceptions spike 9 months after winter solstices, suggesting that the longest nights, with the longest middle-of-the-night wakings, provide the most opportunity. Some people use this time for minor tasks. You might visit the chamber pot. You might check on the fire. You might simply lie in the darkness thinking, processing the day's events, planning tomorrow. The wakeful interval is not insomnia in the modern sense, not a failure to sleep, not a problem to be solved, but simply part of the normal rhythm of rest. Let's talk about the bed itself, which you're sharing with others. Bed sharing is universal in colonial America, among all social classes. Privacy and sleep is a luxury that neither architecture nor economics allows. You share with your spouse, certainly. Children sleep together, sometimes 4 or 5 in a bed, arranged head to toe to maximize space. Servants sleep together. Travelers at inns share beds with strangers. The bed you're lying in is probably the most valuable piece of furniture in your house. The wooden frame represents significant carpentry. The ropes strung across it, which support the mattress, require periodic tightening, hence sleep tight. The mattress itself contains materials that took effort to collect: straw, corn husks, or feathers depending on your resources. The blankets are wool, spun and woven and dyed through many hours of labour. The whole assemblage is an investment that might be specifically mentioned in wills, passed down through generations. The bedding is layered against the cold. In winter, you pile on everything you have, and still wake with frost on the blankets from your breath condensing. A warming pan, a metal container filled with coals from the fire, might be passed between the sheets before you climb in, providing temporary warmth that fades over the hours. The cat, if you have one, is welcome for its body heat. The dog too, if it's small enough and clean enough to share sleeping space. Here's something modern minds find strange. Night clothes are minimal. You sleep in your shift or shirt, the same undergarment you wore all day, and nothing else. Special garments for sleeping are rare except among the wealthy, who might have designated sleeping gowns. The concept of pyjamas as we know them is centuries away. You climb into bed in whatever you're wearing under your outer clothes, and you're grateful for the warmth of bodies beside you. The sounds of night fill the house. Someone snores, someone shifts, making the ropes creak. A child whimpers in a dream. The animals in the barn make their own noises, audible through walls that are not particularly soundproof. Outside, owls call. Coyotes or wolves howl. The wind moves through trees. None of this disturbs you. These are familiar sounds, the normal soundtrack of darkness. You drift back to sleep after your wakeful interval, entering the second sleep that will carry you to morning. This pattern, first sleep, waking, second sleep, is so natural to you that you've never questioned it. The idea that people should sleep straight through from bedtime to morning, that waking in the middle of the night represents a disorder, would strike you as strange. Morning will come soon enough. The rooster will announce it. The cycle will begin again. But for now, you rest, your body recovering from today's labour, your mind processing whatever needs processing, your existence reduced to warmth and darkness and the simple animal satisfaction of sleep. Everything we've discussed, the rising and sleeping, the fire tending and water fetching, the food and clothing and labour and rest, varies dramatically depending on where in colonial America you happen to live. The colonies stretch from the cold shores of Massachusetts to the humid lowlands of Georgia, and the experience of life without electricity differs enormously across this range. In New England, the cold dominates everything. Winters are long, brutal, and deadly serious. Houses are built tight against the wind, their massive central chimneys radiating heat into clustered rooms. The growing season is short, limiting agriculture and forcing reliance on stored food for much of the year. Firewood consumption is enormous. A significant portion of male labour goes simply to feeding fires that barely keep families alive. But New England also has towns, communities, social structures. The Puritan tradition of gathered churches means people live close enough together to attend services, to support each other, to maintain schools and courts and other institutions. Isolation is less extreme here than elsewhere. The trade networks of the coast bring goods from far places. Boston, by the mid-17th century, is a genuine city with urban problems and urban opportunities. The middle colonies, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, offer different conditions. The climate is more moderate, the growing season longer, the agricultural potential greater. The Delaware and Hudson valleys produce grain that feeds not only local populations but exports as well. The famous breadbasket colonies offer prosperity that New England's rocky soil cannot match. Cultural diversity flourishes here. Quakers in Pennsylvania, Dutch in New York, Germans scattered throughout, various small sects following their own practices. The middle colonies are a patchwork of traditions, languages, and ways of living. Your experience of daily life depends heavily on which community you belong to, which traditions you follow, which neighbours surround you. The southern colonies present yet another world. Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, Georgia, these are plantation colonies. Their economy is based on tobacco, rice, indigo, and the enslaved labour that makes large-scale cultivation possible. The climate is hot, the growing season long, the diseases different and often deadlier than those of the north. Here's where we must confront an uncomfortable truth. Much of what we've described assumes you're free. Enslaved people in colonial America, and they numbered in the hundreds of thousands by the mid-1700s, experienced a radically different version of life without electricity. Their labour was forced, their families could be separated at any moment, their bodies were legal property. The challenges of colonial existence, the cold, the heat, the disease, the endless work, fell heaviest on those who had no choice, and received no benefit from their toil. The frontier presents its own variations. Beyond the settled regions in the backcountry of Pennsylvania, or the valleys of Virginia, or the Carolina Piedmont, families live in genuine isolation. Neighbours might be miles away. The nearest church, store, or court might require a day's travel to reach. Here, self-sufficiency isn't an ideal, but a necessity. You produce what you need, or you do without. Frontier life is dangerous in ways settled regions have mostly tamed. Conflict with indigenous peoples is ongoing. Raids happen, captives are taken, violence erupts unpredictably. Predators remain a genuine threat. Bears and wolves and mountain lions haven't yet learned to fear humans. The law is distant, and disputes are often settled personally, sometimes violently. Historians still argue about whether life was better on the frontier or in settled regions. The frontier offered opportunity. Land was cheap or free, social hierarchies less rigid, the chance to rise unencumbered by old-world constraints. But it also offered danger, isolation, and hardship that broke many who attempted it. The choice between the two was never simple. What unites all these variations is the absence of electricity. Whether you're shivering in a Massachusetts farmhouse or sweating in a Carolina rice field, you're living without the power grid that modern life assumes. The adaptations differ by region. New Englanders bank fires differently than Georgians. Food preservation varies by climate. Clothing adjusts to temperature. But the fundamental challenge remains constant. Making human life possible using only human muscle, animal power, and the occasional assist from wind and water. Your location shapes everything, yet certain things remain the same everywhere. The sun rises and sets, the seasons turn, the work continues, relentless, essential, and shared by everyone who lived in this time before machines took over. Imagine, just for a moment, that you could bring your colonial self forward in time. Pluck yourself from that farmhouse, from the fire and the candles and the endless labour, and set yourself down in a modern home. What would you make of it? What would astonish you? What would you find utterly incomprehensible? The light would be the first thing, bright, steady, available in every room, summoned by touching a switch on the wall. No smoke, no smell, no need for tending, just light, endless light, as much as you want whenever you want it. The very idea that you could illuminate your entire house as bright as noon on a summer day at midnight in December would seem like magic. You'd touch the switch again and again, watching the light appear and disappear, trying to understand how this miracle works. The temperature would be next. The house is warm, warm everywhere, not just near the fire. The far corners of rooms are comfortable. The bedroom is comfortable. You could walk around in light clothing in the middle of winter, inside, and feel perfectly fine. There's no fire visible, no obvious source for this heat, just warm air flowing from vents in the floor or walls. And in summer, the reverse, cool air. The stifling heat somehow vanquished, comfort in any season at any time. The water would amaze you. Turn a handle and water flows, clean water, hot or cold as you prefer, in unlimited quantities. The idea that you could fill a bathtub with warm water, soak in it for leisure rather than necessity, and then let all the water drain away without a thought. This would seem criminally wasteful. Remember the bucket, remember the well, remember the back-breaking trips in all weather, and now it just flows? How? From where? The food would overwhelm you. A cold box in the kitchen, the refrigerator, keeps food fresh for days, for weeks. Ice forms inside it automatically. Meat doesn't spoil, milk doesn't sour, vegetables stay crisp. The frantic preserving of autumn, the fear of starvation in late winter, the constant calculation about what's safe to eat and what might kill you. All of this becomes unnecessary when you can store anything indefinitely in a magical cold box. Here's what might truly break your colonial mind. People seem to have nothing to do. The labour that filled every hour of your existence, the cooking, the cleaning, the spinning, the sewing, the carrying, the hauling, the tending, much of it simply doesn't exist here. Machines wash clothes, machines wash dishes, food comes prepared in packages, clothing costs so little that nobody makes their own. The work that defined human existence for millennia has been replaced by quiet humming boxes that accomplish in minutes what took your family hours or days. And what do people do with all this time? They sit in front of glowing rectangles. They watch stories unfold on screens. They tap their fingers on small boxes that connect them to people across the world. They entertain themselves with an endless stream of images and sounds and words that flow from nowhere visible, requiring no effort to create. You might feel something like grief for all the labour that shaped your identity, all the skills that made you valuable, all the knowledge that seems suddenly useless. What good is knowing how to bank a fire when there's no fire to bank? What good is preserving food when preservation happens automatically? What good is spinning thread when thread costs nearly nothing at the store? But you might also feel something like liberation, the crushing weight of necessary labour lifted, the constant fear of fire dying, of food spoiling, of cold killing, of work never ending relieved, the possibility of doing something other than surviving, of having hours in the day that aren't already claimed by the simple maintenance of existence. And what would your descendants think of you if they could see you struggling with the fire and the well and the endless, endless work? They might feel pity, they might feel admiration, they might feel that peculiar mixture of both that comes from encountering people who lived through challenges we can barely imagine. They would know something, though, that you know in your bones. Life requires effort. Whether that effort is spent hauling water from a well or navigating some different complexity of the modern world, existence demands something from us. Your challenges were physical, visible, immediate. Theirs are different but not absent. The shape of labour changes. The necessity of labour does not. And now the fire burns low in your colonial hearth, the embers glowing soft and orange in the darkness. The family has settled into sleep around you. Their breathing slow and steady. Their bodies finally at rest after the long day's demands. Outside your small windows, the stars wheel slowly overhead, the same stars that your ancestors watched and your descendants will watch, unchanged by centuries. Let your own breathing slow now. Let your muscles soften one by one, releasing the tensions you didn't even know you were carrying. The past we visited together, that world of fire and labour and simple survival, it fades now, gentle as smoke rising from banked coals. You don't have to haul water in the morning, you don't have to tend a fire, you don't have to spin thread or preserve meat or walk to the outhouse in the cold. The work that filled those colonial days is not your work. Your rest tonight is simply rest, a gift your ancestors would have treasured beyond measure. The night holds you now, safe and warm, electricity humming quietly in the walls around you, light available at a touch if you need it, heat keeping the cold at bay without effort. Sleep comes easy in such comfort. Let it come. The past is past, tomorrow is tomorrow, and tonight there is only this moment, this breath, this slow drift toward dreams. The colonial family sleeps in their time, you sleep in yours. Different centuries, same human need for rest. Close your eyes now. Let the weight of history, the weight of your own day, the weight of everything you carry, let it all go just for these quiet hours. The world will still be there in the morning. The light switch will still work, the water will still flow, but for now, sleep.